If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 60, The Great Fear. Mountain Disaster Area. Ah! They're here. Two sharp female voices pierced through the air, the sound echoing across the rocky terrain. The villains, who had been teleported in advance, sneered as they looked up at Kaminari, Momo, and Kyoka, who were in free fall. This isn't good. Kaminari thought, realizing the danger. Acting quickly, he activated his quirk, his body surging with golden electricity. Twisting mid-air, he spread his arms wide, grabbing the panicked Momo and Kyoka, one on each side, pulling them close. Boom! 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 Just below them, a villain with two dog heads for hands grinned wickedly, ready to strike. Future heroes? Even better! He snarled. Regret your choice to become heroes in your final moments, kids. With lightning speed, the villain's dog-like hands snapped toward Kaminari's legs, aiming to bite down hard. Get lost! Kaminari yelled, kicking the villain square in the face, sending the snarling creature flying back. Using the momentum, Kaminari angled their fall toward a nearby hill. Crackling! Ah! Ugh! A split second later, they landed hard on the ground, but with Kaminari's quick thinking and lightning reflexes, the impact was softened. The two dog heads groaned in pain as electricity surged through their bodies, leaving them twitching on the ground. Boom! The surrounding villains hesitated, eyeing the fierce dog-head villain who lay smoking and unconscious. For a moment, they were stunned, uncertain whether to advance. There's a lot of them, Kaminari muttered, sizing up the situation. At least 60 villains stood before them, and although they'd just taken one down, the odds were far from favorable. Kaminari, we need to focus on defense. Momo said, her expression serious as she quickly created a knife and staff for herself and Kyoka to use as weapons. Kaminari didn't need any, his lightning was more than enough. Kaminari nodded, moving them slowly toward the mountain wall. Stick close to the rock face. Momo, make more speakers and set them up in a semicircle. Kyoka's mind clicked into gear. You want to use my quirk to amplify the sound and counterattack? Exactly. Kaminari replied, keeping his eyes on the villains. What about you? Momo asked as she began forming the speakers. Me. Kaminari grinned, the golden sparks dancing around him. I'll buy you time. With that, Kaminari launched himself forward, turning into a blur of electricity as he rushed toward the advancing villains. Be careful! Kyoka called out, her grip tightening on the staff. Momo didn't flinch, focusing on her task. She knew that completing the defense as quickly as possible was the best way to help Kaminari right now. You think you can handle us by yourself, kid? A villain with 4 legs and massive arms charged at Kaminari, swinging wildly. Stop looking down on us, brat! Another villain growled, activating his quirk to create a barrier of sharp spikes. But Kaminari didn't flinch. He weaved through their attacks effortlessly, dodging the massive arms and spikes with lightning-fast movements. With a single electric-charged punch to the gut, he sent the 4-legged villain flying. In a swift move, Kaminari leapt out of the encirclement, only to be surrounded again by more enemies. The villains weren't prepared for Kaminari's speed and agility. In mere moments, more than a dozen of them lay unconscious, twitching on the ground from electric shocks. But Kaminari knew he couldn't keep this up forever. His quirk didn't generate electricity, it stored and released it. If he kept using up his power on individual attacks, he'd be drained before long. I need a better strategy, he thought, dodging another attack. But I also need to buy more time for Momo and Kyoka. Then it hit him. After knocking another villain out with a lightning-charged fist, Kaminari glanced around. About 30 villains remained, but the time for hesitation was over. You're all done for if you keep coming at me. Kaminari's voice dropped, the usual playfulness gone. His eyes burned with intensity. Don't blame me for what happens next. Up until now, Kaminari had held back. He didn't want to seriously hurt anyone, but the reality was simple, if he showed mercy here, he and his friends might not make it out alive. I'm sorry, Kaminari thought to himself, his expression hardening. But I'm not ready to fall here. Without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple 100 yen coin. He flipped it into the air, catching it between his fingers with practiced ease. If someone has to be taken down, he muttered, electricity crackling up his arm. Then it's going to be you. A ring of electricity formed around his hand, glowing brighter with each passing second. The villains immediately sensed the threat. What is that? One of them stammered, his eyes widening in fear. Not good. This is bad. Another shouted, terror flooding his voice. Those closest to Kaminari could feel it, the raw, unfiltered power gathering in his hand. They could feel the danger radiating from him, sharp and palpable, like a blade pressed to their throats. Their instincts screamed at them to run, to flee, to do anything to get away. But their legs refused to move. Under the crushing weight of fear, their bodies froze. Despite the frantic orders in their minds, their limbs wouldn't respond. They were paralyzed by the sheer force of the moment. Ba, ba, ba. Chapter 61, Lightning Chain. In the next second, an electromagnetic beam shot forward, so fast that all anyone could see was the blinding golden light. It tore through the air, rocks, and everything else in its path before anyone could even react. The result? A straight line of 10 villains, all left stunned, their clothes singed and smoking, with the shockwave knocking them off their feet. For a moment, the world went silent. The atmosphere dropped to freezing point as both the remaining villains and Kaminari's classmates, Momo and Kyoka, stared in shock. The golden afterglow from the blast lingered in the air, making the scene all the more intimidating. Ding! Kaminari stood with a cold expression, looking at the villains, whose faces were now painted with fear. Slowly, he pulled another coin from his pocket and pointed it at another group of villains in a different direction. If you want to test your luck, step forward, Kaminari said, his voice icy and controlled. The villains, drenched in sweat, didn't dare move. They hadn't expected a teenager to be this powerful. Their eyes flickered nervously between Kaminari and the 10 unconscious bodies lying on the ground, all with their chests scorched and smoking, as if they'd been struck by an explosive force. Momo, make me 50 steel balls, now, Kaminari commanded, his gaze not leaving the villains. Hey! Momo snapped out of her daze, startled by the request. Oh! Right! I'm on it! Though she hurried to produce the steel balls, she and Kyoka couldn't help but glance at Kaminari's back. The golden characters embroidered on his robe seemed to shimmer in the wind, and for the first time, they both understood what it meant for Kaminari to call himself the first Raikage. Before they could process their thoughts further, a gruff voice broke the silence. That move he just used, it can only be done once, and only in one direction. The villains stirred uneasily. One of them had spoken up, challenging the others with his assumption. But the rest of the villains were far from convinced. You think we're idiots? One of them spat, glaring at the speaker. You don't even know for sure. You're just guessing. And you expect us to gamble our lives on that? Even if the assumption was correct, that Kaminari could only attack in one direction, no one wanted to be the unlucky target. One wrong move, and they'd end up like the 10 corpses at their feet. The speaker's words might have held some sway, but physically, no one dared to step forward. Their fear was palpable, and despite the tension, not a single villain made a move. Where are you hiding? Kaminari thought, scanning the surroundings for the source of the voice. Whoever was speaking was smart, dangerous, even and that made them a priority. But before he could locate the source, the voice rang out again, this time filled with disdain and frustration. Have you all forgotten the gift the boss gave us? The surrounding villains hesitated, visibly torn. Some of them wavered, but ultimately, no one took action. Whatever gift the voice was referring to, it wasn't enough to override their fear of Kaminari. Suddenly, the ground beneath Kaminari cracked open with a loud crunch, and 2 powerful arms burst out from the earth, grabbing onto his legs. Kaminari! Momo and Kyoka screamed in unison, panic flashing across their faces. A villain, hidden beneath the ground, had struck. His hands, now clamped around Kaminari's legs, crackled with a surge of electricity. You forgot the gift, but I haven't. The villain growled, his voice filled with hatred. You're finished, kid. But instead of panicking, Kaminari's face broke into a grin. Why is he smiling? A nearby villain murmured, his eyes wide with disbelief. He's laughing. Another one exclaimed, horrified by what he was witnessing. Indeed, Kaminari was laughing. Even as the electricity from the villain's hands surged through him, Kaminari barely flinched. He looked down at the villain's hands and chuckled. Ah, the level difference between us really is big, especially when it comes to quirks. Kaminari smirked. The lightning coursing through him was absorbed into his body with ease. His quirk, perfect for dealing with any electricity-based attack, allowed him to take in the current like it was nothing. In fact, it was recharging him. "Thanks for the charge," Kaminari said, his voice low and dangerous. "But now, it's time for you to disappear." With a crack of electricity, Kaminari released a massive surge of golden lightning into the villain's arms. The current traveled straight down to the masked figure still hidden beneath the ground. "Impossible, my level!" The villain's voice broke into a blood-curdling scream. For 5 long seconds, the villain convulsed, his body unable to withstand the intense shock. His wails echoed across the battlefield until, finally, he passed out, his body limp. "How pathetic," Kaminari said, stepping over the villain's unconscious form. "You thought you were something, but you're just a lackey." He continued walking forward, his eyes scanning the remaining villains. They had completely lost their fighting spirit. "Momo, how's it going?" Kaminari called back without looking. "All done," Momo shouted, throwing a small white bag toward him. Kaminari caught it mid-air, quickly checking the contents. "Perfect," he muttered, eyeing the dozens of steel balls inside. He then looked up, locking eyes with the remaining villains. A devilish grin spread across his face. "Now, it's your turn," he said, his voice laced with anticipation. "Don't worry. You won't die, probably." With a powerful twist of his waist, Kaminari spun in place. As he did, he sent a small jolt of electricity into the steel balls, charging them with a crackling energy. In one smooth motion, he hurled all 50 steel balls into the air, scattering them in every direction. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The steel balls spread out, landing behind or beside the surrounding villains. Some of them looked down in confusion, sensing that something was wrong. They started to move, but it was too late. Chain lightning. 300,000 volts. Kaminari unleashed a torrent of electricity, more powerful than anything he had used before. The energy surged from his body, arcing toward the charged steel balls. The balls acted as conduits, spreading the electric current outward in all directions. Crack, crack, crack. Ah! The lightning tore through the battlefield, connecting each steel ball like a web of electrical fury. The villains caught within the circle screamed as the current surged through their bodies, their muscles spasming uncontrollably. In an instant, the entire area within a 20-meter radius was engulfed in golden light. Dozens of bodies fell to the ground, twitching as they were overwhelmed by the sheer voltage. Kaminari stood at the center of the storm, his hair crackling with leftover electricity. His plan had worked perfectly. He turned back toward Momo and Kyoka, who stood in awe. "It's over," he said quietly, watching as the last of the villains collapsed into unconsciousness. Chapter 62, Friendship Between Men. The simulated disaster area, designed to replicate earthquake accidents, was a scene of chaos. Twisted buildings, cracked streets, and scattered rubble painted a grim picture. It resembled a post-apocalyptic wasteland, only without the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. "Go to hell!" Boom! A violent explosion erupted from the ruins of a broken building, scattering debris and sending unconscious villains flying. Thud! The bodies and rubble hit the ground with brutal force, the dull sound echoing across the desolate area. The carnage caused by the blast was clear to see. "Damn, Bakugo's on a rampage!" Kirishima exclaimed, wiping the sweat from his forehead after landing a hard punch on a villain. He turned to watch Bakugo wreaking havoc nearby, using his explosive quirk with reckless abandon. Tetsu, whose battle uniform was in tatters from fighting, frowned in agreement. "I thought I was one of the top guys in Class A, especially after Kaminari and Todoroki. But after fighting alongside Bakugo for just a few minutes, I realized," he clenched his fists, "I can't beat that guy." As much as he hated to admit it, the truth was undeniable. Even though Bakugo's personality was grating, Tetsu had to acknowledge his strength. "Damn it!" he growled, frustration boiling over. With a swift kick, he sent 2 villains crashing out of a window. "I've been working so hard, so why do I feel like I'm falling behind?" The battlefield calmed for a moment. The villains who had been swarming the 3 boys lay scattered on the ground, either unconscious or thrown from the building. The best those villains could hope for was a few broken bones, if they were lucky. "Wow! What's with your kicks, Tetsu? They're insane," Kirishima said, genuinely curious. He'd noticed that despite their similar quirks, Tetsu fought differently from him. While Kirishima preferred to go in with his fists hardened and ready, Tetsu relied more on his legs. And when he kicked, villains flew like they'd been hit by a wrecking ball. Hey! Tetsu scratched the back of his head. It's simple. They're weak, so it's easier to clear them out with kicks. Inwardly, though, he thought, just wait until I master judo, I'll be a force of nature with my punches and kicks. Despite his frustration, Tetsu was satisfied with his leg strength. It was the result of endless practice, training his body at high speed day and night. As the dust settled, the two boys noticed Bakugo moving outside the building, heading off on his own. Hey, Bakugo, where are you going? Kirishima called after him, jogging to catch up. Ha! Bakugo shot him a look of irritation. Where do you think? I'm going after that teleporting BD. I'm gonna kill him. Kirishima groaned, shaking his head. We're still in the middle of this, and you're acting like a kid. Bakugo ignored him, his face set in that familiar stubborn glare. Kirishima looked helplessly to Tetsu for backup. Surprisingly, Tetsu nodded in agreement with Bakugo this time. Actually, he's got a point. That smoke guy is the key to their movements. If we catch him, we stop them from getting away. Kirishima blinked in surprise. Since when did you get so thoughtful? Tetsu shrugged, scratching his head. After hanging around Kaminari for so long, I've picked up a few things. But if Kaminari's here, he's probably already figured this out. He's probably dealing with it right now. Didn't expect much from your iron head, Bakugo sneered, though his tone was more mocking than hostile. TCH, don't act like you thought any of this through, Tetsu shot back, unbothered. You're just following your instincts as usual. Whatever you say, Bakugo grumbled, not bothering to argue. He sprinted off, explosions popping from his palms as he shot forward. Bakugo! Kirishima called after him, frustrated at his friend's stubbornness. Let's go, Tetsu said, patting Kirishima on the shoulder. He cancelled his steel transformation, relying on his trained legs to close the gap. We can't let him hog all the action. Kirishima grinned, falling back into his regular form as well. You got it. Though Bakugo led the way, the two boys were right behind him, their competitive spirits pushing them to keep up. Stop following me! Bakugo barked again, his temper flaring. Kirishima couldn't help but laugh. We're not following you. We're going to find Kaminari. Tetsu chimed in, if I can figure out the black smoke guy is key, Kaminari's already miles ahead of us. Bakugo snorted. What are you, his lapdog? Tetsu just smiled, not taking the bait. I doubt you'd understand something like the friendship between men. Tisk, that's disgusting, Bakugo snapped, though his mind drifted to Midoriya for a moment. That idiot had always rushed in to help, even when Bakugo pushed him away. He shook the thought from his mind. Meanwhile, Kaminari, Momo, and Kyoka had returned to the entrance of USJ, where they'd first been teleported. 13. Momo gasped, spotting 13's damaged spacesuit, now ripped open and useless. Kaminari. Yao Momo. Jiro. Eureka and Mina waved at them, their relief palpable. Kaminari quickly assessed the area. Bodies of defeated villains were strewn about, but something was off. Where's the smoke BD? He asked sharply. Shoji Mizo, the tall multi-armed student, stepped forward. The black smoke disappeared after Ida made it out to get help. Kaminari's eyes followed the direction Shoji was pointing, toward the far end of the battlefield. Through the haze of knocked-out minions, he could make out a dark figure still moving. The black smoke guy. Stay here. I'm going to help Mr. Aizawa, Kaminari said, his voice steady and serious. Kaminari, are you crazy? Momo called after him. It's too dangerous. Don't go alone. Kyoka added, her voice filled with concern. Kaminari gave them a reassuring glance over his shoulder. We can't let Mr. Aizawa handle all of this by himself. Don't worry, I've still got those 50 steel balls from earlier. I can handle a group fight. Steel balls? Eureka asked, looking confused, but Kaminari didn't offer any more explanation. With that, Kaminari sprinted off, his speed leaving behind a golden afterimage. The words printed on the back of his robe, the first raikage, fluttered in the wind as if they had come to life. Chapter 63, Finale? That's, Class Teacher Aizawa. Kaminari, surrounded by crackling electricity, could already make out the scene ahead, even though he was still some distance away. His sharp eyes widened as he saw the bloodied figure of Aizawa-sensei pinned to the ground by a monstrous figure with an exposed brain. The sight sent a shock through his system. Did he lose? The class teacher. Kaminari had heard about how Aizawa fought off nearly 100 villains by himself, and despite the overwhelming numbers, it still felt surreal to see the seasoned heroes lying defeated in a pool of his own blood. After all, this was the man who commanded so much respect from his students. He gritted his teeth and pushed himself harder, his body surging with electricity as he increased his speed by another 20%, despite the burning pain spreading through his muscles. His eyes darted to the side and caught sight of a pale-haired boy, Tomura Shigaraki, rushing toward Tsuyu and Midoriya by the riverbank. Panic welled up inside Kaminari as he realized how close Tomura's hand was to their faces. Even though he didn't know what his quirk was exactly, he had a sinking feeling that nothing good would come of it. Please. Please let me get closer. 50 meters, that's all I need. He was desperate now. Despite his earlier misgivings about becoming a hero, he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stand by and watch his classmates suffer, especially not when he had the power to intervene. He swore to himself, if he could just get within 50 meters, he'd shoot that silver coin on his fingertip straight through Shigaraki's head, without hesitation. Damn it! I'm too slow. His heart sank as he saw Shigaraki's hand inch closer to Tsuyu's frozen face. The white-haired villain was mere moments from touching her. No. But then, Shigaraki's hand stopped, seemingly out of nowhere. Kaminari blinked in confusion, only to realize the reason for the sudden halt. It was Aizawa, still conscious despite the blood covering his face, lifting his head just enough to activate his quirk and erase Shigaraki's power. Cut it out, Eraserhead. You're really something else, hey. Shigaraki muttered with annoyance, turning to look at the struggling teacher. But in the next second, Nomu's massive fist came down on Aizawa, slamming him back into the ground. This time, Aizawa lay still, unconscious. No. Midoriya's eyes flashed with anger and determination as he activated his quirk, one for all. His right arm glowed a brilliant red, and in an instant, he shot toward Shigaraki with everything he had. Put your hands down. Smash! The sheer force of Midoriya's punch created a shockwave that tore through the air, sending debris flying everywhere. The intensity of the impact was so great that the river nearby surged up like a tidal wave, crashing against the shore. At the same moment, Kaminari reached within range, his eyes burning with the same determination. Without hesitation, he fired off his railgun, sending a golden beam of electromagnetic energy straight toward Shigaraki's head. Asterisk boom. Asterisk. The combined force of Midoriya's punch and Kaminari's railgun sent a powerful shockwave across the battlefield. The ground trembled beneath them, dust and debris spiraled in the air, and the river's waves churned violently. Even Kaminari, who had stopped his high-speed movement, was forced to brace himself against the violent winds. His platinum robe flapped wildly, nearly tearing off from the sheer force of the blast. I've seen it before, but man, where does all that power come from? Kaminari muttered, his voice hoarse from the strain. He could barely comprehend the level of destruction Midoriya's punch alone had caused. It was like watching a missile go off, and he couldn't imagine how a kid their age could produce such a result. As the dust began to settle and the wind died down, Kaminari's vision cleared, and he scanned the area. Is he dead? He asked aloud, trying to see if Shigaraki had survived the combined attack. There was no way anyone could survive both Midoriya's punch and a direct hit from his railgun, right? Even a seasoned hero would struggle to withstand such an onslaught. But then, Kaminari's heart sank. It didn't work. Midoriya's voice trembled with disbelief as he stared at the towering figure of Nomu, standing unharmed in front of Shigaraki. The brain-exposed creature had somehow blocked both attacks, his monstrous body appearing completely unscathed. What the hell is that thing? Kaminari's eyes widened as the reality of the situation set in. That thing had tanked both their attacks as if they were nothing. This was no ordinary villain. Midoriya's words from earlier echoed in Kaminari's mind. They've come up with a strategy to kill All Might, haven't they? Kaminari's chest tightened as he stared at Nomu. Was this monster specifically designed to take down the symbol of peace? Shigaraki, who had been hiding behind Nomu's hulking figure, chuckled darkly. That was quite a show, Smash. You must be one of All Might's little pets, hey. His mocking tone made Kaminari's blood boil, but then Shigeriki's attention shifted to him. And you? Shigeriki's voice turned cold. You almost killed me with that beam of yours. How ruthless for a hero student. Kaminari only smirked in response. Ruthless? You must be new to this. If you thought I was playing nice, you're in for a surprise. Aren't you supposed to be a villain? Maybe you're just an intern, hey. The taunt stung Shigaraki, his expression darkening with anger. Let's see if you can still talk like that after I'm done with you. Nomu. Get him. At Shigeriki's command, the massive Nomu abandoned Midoriya and the others, vanishing with terrifying speed as it charged straight at Kaminari. He didn't even leave behind an afterimage, it was as if he simply disappeared. So fast, way too fast. Kaminari's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't react in time. His eyes could barely track Nomu's movement, let alone his body. The monstrous figure loomed over him in an instant, and Kaminari knew he was out of options. Am I going to die here? Asterisk boom. Asterisk. Another explosion of air erupted as Nomu's fist slammed into the ground where Kaminari stood. Dust and debris shot into the sky, and the ground trembled from the force of the blow. But something wasn't right. Shigaraki squinted through the dust cloud, his voice laced with confusion. What's going on? He muttered, unable to see through the thick veil of dust. Chapter 64, I am here. What's going on? Shigeriki's voice cracked with confusion as he peered into the smoke. He had expected Nomu to easily catch Kaminari, so the massive blast that followed didn't make any sense. Kaminari. Midoriya, Tsuyu, and Mineta stared at the swirling dust with bated breath, a sinking feeling gnawing at them. Is he dead? Mineta's voice trembled, his fear escaping in a panicked whisper. But before anyone could respond, an all-too-familiar, booming laugh echoed from the smoke. Ha 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 ha. It's fine now. And just as the dust began to settle, a towering, muscular figure emerged, a symbol of strength and hope. Holding down the monstrous Nomu with raw power, All Might grinned, his teeth gleaming as he declared, because I am here. All Might. Kaminari's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the man standing between him and certain death. For the first time, he felt what it truly meant to be saved by a hero. All Might wasn't just a symbol of peace. This is what a hero is. In that instant, Kaminari felt something shift inside him. He'd always known that heroes saved people, but seeing All Might in action, standing between him and a monstrous villain, he understood on a deeper level. This wasn't just about heroism, it was about hope. About being the person who could pull others back from the brink of despair. All Might! Midoriya shouted, relief and awe evident in his voice. Oh, you've finally come. Shigeriki's eyes lit up with a twisted excitement. The game can really begin now. All Might quickly assessed the situation, glancing at Midoriya, Tsuyu, Mineta, and the bloodied figure of Aizawa lying on the ground. Guilt and frustration flickered across his face. He berated himself silently. How scared these children must have been. How hard their teacher had fought, all because I wasn't here. Nomu. Shigeriki's voice was impatient, signaling his creation to attack. All Might's eyes widened as he felt Nomu's strength increase in an instant. Kaminari, get back. He barked, his voice filled with urgency. Without a word, Kaminari pushed himself backward, activating his high-speed movement to put as much distance as he could between himself and the impending clash. He knew his limits. A battle at this level was beyond anything he could handle. Just as Kaminari distanced himself, a massive shockwave erupted. He found himself stumbling backward from the sheer force, barely able to keep his balance. It was as if an invisible wall of pressure was pushing him further and further back, a testament to the raw power clashing nearby. Oh, my God! Kaminari muttered, staring at the ground where All Might and Nomu fought. One powerful over-the-shoulder throw from All Might had left a crater in the concrete, at least half a meter deep and 10 meters wide. Seeing it in person, it's insane. I thought I understood his power, but this is on another level. As Kaminari processed the scene, All Might appeared beside him in a flash, carrying Midoriya, Tsuyu, Mineta, and the severely injured Aizawa. All Might's speed was nearly incomprehensible, he'd managed to retrieve everyone in the blink of an eye. Kaminari, take Aizawa-sensei and get everyone out of here. All Might commanded, his voice stern. Kaminari could only nod in stunned agreement. The sheer magnitude of All Might's strength and speed left him speechless. In the distance, Shigeriki's hands trembled, his voice laced with frustration and envy. This guy, this, is true power. Fighting, rescuing, all at once. He's truly a symbol of strength, he muttered, his mind reeling from the display. Kurogiri, the smoky villain who had initially scattered the students, reappeared next to Shigaraki. Shigaraki Tamura, we should maintain our distance and let Nomo handle him. But Shigaraki wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on All Might, his mind whirling. But he's weaker than I expected. Maybe the rumors are true. Maybe. All Might really has gotten weaker. Meanwhile, All Might faced Nomo once again, his gaze steely. He'd already felt Nomo's unnatural strength and resilience. This creature was unlike any villain he'd faced before. Let's see just how much you can take. Carolina. Smash. A powerful blow connected with Nomu, sending shockwaves through the air. Kaminari, Tsuyu, and Mineta, who were retreating with the unconscious Aizawa, could only watch in awe. But as Midoriya turned back, something in his heart pulled him toward the battle. All Might, he's in trouble. Midoriya's face contorted with anguish. He entrusted Aizawa to Tsuyu and Mineta and, without thinking, broke into a sprint back toward All Might. His eyes shone with desperation, even tears beginning to form. All Might. I still have so much I need to ask you. You can't go down like this. Seeing Midoriya's reckless charge, Kaminari groaned in frustration. He had no intention of going back into that war zone, but there was no way he could let Midoriya run to his death. Damn it, Kaminari muttered under his breath. Activating his high-speed movement again, he darted forward, catching up to Midoriya and stopping him in his tracks with a swift but gentle shock to the back of the neck. Kaminari. Midoriya's wide eyes filled with disbelief as he collapsed, unable to move. Tears spilled down his cheeks, his mouth open in silent protest. Why are you stopping me? Don't you see? All Might is going to die. Midoriya's eyes were filled with anger, desperation, and a plea. He was begging Kaminari to let him go, to let him fight beside his hero. But Kaminari shook his head. I know you don't get it, but if you charge in there, you'll just make it harder for him. Before Midoriya could respond, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. Fire, smoke, and ice filled the air, covering Nomu in a haze. Out of the smoke came Bakugo's furious yell. Get your filthy hands off All Might! As the dust settled, Todoroki's eyes crawled across the ground, freezing Nomu's legs in place. I heard you wanted to kill All Might, he said coldly, directing his gaze at Shigaraki. I came to see it myself. We're here too. Kirishima and Tetsu charged in, striking at Shigaraki from both sides. But Shigaraki dodged with surprising agility, his movements smooth and practiced. A symbol of peace can't be killed by lowlifes like you, All Might growled, his face a mixture of anger and resolve. He knew what these students didn't. This was far from over. Kaminari watched from a distance, his heart pounding. He'd never felt so helpless. Despite the apparent advantage, he knew this wasn't a battle the students should be involved in. Then he saw it. Nomu's mangled arm and leg were healing right before his eyes. The flesh and bone regenerating at an unnatural rate. Isn't his quirk just shock absorption? Todoroki asked in shock. Shigaraki sneered. Who said he only had one quirk? This is super regeneration. He pointed at All Might, malice gleaming in his eyes. This Nomo was created specifically to take down All Might at full strength. Kaminari's mind raced. If only I had mastered that technique, maybe then I could make a difference. But now, all he could do was watch, a silent witness to a battle that had clearly exceeded his limits. Get out of here! He shouted to his classmates. All of you! You're just going to hold him back. Todoroki, Kirishima, and the others looked back at him, the realization dawning on them. This was no ordinary villain, and they were not equipped to face him. Kaminari's voice cut through the chaos, steady but full of urgency. This is a fight beyond any of us. Chapter 65, Violence and Sequence. Hee hee. All Might stood firm, panting heavily as he stared down Tamura Shigaraki. Fury simmered beneath his usually calm demeanor as he demanded, don't you have any sense of restraint? Shigaraki shrugged nonchalantly. Well, we're only doing this for our own people. Try to understand, hero. He then gestured lazily towards Kaminari and Midoriya, a mocking grin on his face. Aren't you the same? Look at that little nobody over there, he was ready to punch me hard. With that strength, he could have easily killed me with one blow. Shigaraki's grin widened. And that blonde kid? He's the scariest one of all. Is he really from the hero course? He actually tried to blow my head off. Such a cruel and cold-blooded guy seems more like a villain than me, don't you think? Hearing this, Bakugo, Tetsu, Todoroki, and the others involuntarily glanced at Kaminari. Shigaraki's words lingered, planting seeds of doubt as he continued his twisted monologue, his tone growing more fanatical. Violence used for others is praised as noble. But violence for yourself? That's called villainy, right, hero? Shigaraki spread his arms wide, his voice growing louder as he faced All Might, who stood bruised and bleeding. This whole system, dividing people into heroes and villains, deciding what's good and evil, it's all built on lies. The so-called symbol of peace is nothing more than a government puppet, a weapon to keep everyone else down. In his frenzy, Shigaraki spat out his conclusion with venomous conviction. Violence only begets more violence. Killing you, All Might, will show the world the truth. There was a certain dark charisma in his words. Todoroki, Tetsu, Kirishima, and others wavered slightly as his twisted logic resonated. It made a disturbing kind of sense. Only Bakugo remained unaffected. He didn't bother with Shigaraki's words. To him, it was just noise. His intent to kill this villain hadn't diminished one bit. But Kaminari wasn't having any of it. Violence only begets violence. He scoffed, drawing everyone's attention, even Shigaraki's. Yeah, that's true. Shigaraki turned, momentarily taken aback. Oh? So you agree with me? It wasn't just Shigaraki. Even Bakugo, Todoroki, and the others didn't understand what Kaminari was getting at. Kaminari sneered. I agree that violence leads to violence. But you don't need to prove that to the world. Haven't you gotten it backward? He fixed Shigaraki with a disdainful look, like he was addressing a fool. How do you think heroes even came to be in the first place? Isn't it exactly because of people like you? People who abuse their quirks to hurt others, forcing those who want a stable society to step up and become heroes. Kaminari's voice grew colder. You're the ones who messed up the order in the first place, you idiot. Shigaraki's eye twitched at the insult. You. Kaminari wasn't finished. He gave Shigaraki a pitying glance. Everyone learns this in elementary school. What's the matter? Did you not go to school? Shigaraki's face contorted with rage. His speech had only been a means to an end, but Kaminari's words struck a nerve he hadn't expected. That last line, in particular, felt like a direct stab to his pride. Nomu. Shigaraki hissed, his voice shaking with anger. As if understanding its master's command, Nomu immediately rushed toward Kaminari, its hulking form disappearing in a blur. But before it could close the distance, All Might intercepted it, grabbing Nomu by the arms and roaring, "Don't underestimate heroes, villain!" With a mighty kick to Nomu's gut, All Might launched the monstrous creature across the field, sending it crashing into a wall with an impact that shook the ground. All Might! Tetsu gasped, awe evident in his voice. Looks like it's our time to step up, Todoroki said, his voice cold and determined. Yeah. Let's take this guy down. Kirishima clenched his fists, ready for action. But All Might turned to them with a firm expression. Stay back. Todoroki frowned. If I hadn't intervened before, things might have been bad for you. All Might's voice softened. That's different, Todoroki. But thank you. He glanced at Todoroki with genuine gratitude. The young hero had saved his life, and he didn't take that lightly. Now, please, All Might said, standing tall, watch as a real hero gets serious. By this time, Midoriya, who had been supported by Kaminari, had regained his senses. His expression turned frantic as he looked at All Might, worry plain on his face. But you're already hurt. And, your time. Time. Kaminari caught the word, a sinking feeling stirring in his gut. If All Might had some kind of time limit on his power, then they were all in serious trouble. He turned to Midoriya urgently. Midoriya, what do you mean by time? Is there something wrong with All Might? Before he could finish, All Might gave a reassuring thumbs up, flashing his trademark grin. Don't worry. A hero's job is never done. Turning his back on the students, he refocused on Nomu. But in his mind, he kept count. 1 minute, that's all I've got left. Shigaraki seemed to sense it too. Nomu. Kurogiri. Let's end this now. Kurogiri opened a portal near Shigaraki, ready to assist. Shigaraki turned his gaze to the students in the distance, his focus landing on Kaminari. I'll handle those brats. All right, let's finish this. Kurogiri replied, preparing to close the gap. As they moved, All Might and Nomu's clash sent a massive shockwave rippling through the area, blowing everyone back, students and villains alike, with the sheer force of their collision. I am the symbol of peace. All Might roared, his voice reverberating like thunder across the battlefield. Chapter 66, Society's Sacrifice. With All Might's furious shout, the force of his clash with Nomu erupted like a bomb. Shockwaves rippled outward, shattering the ground in every direction, leaving the area around them battered and broken. Chunks of debris were hurled into the air, spinning wildly as they collided with each other, breaking apart into smaller, more dangerous fragments that whirled around the two titans. Tomura Shigaraki, caught in the violent gusts, managed to flip and twist mid-air, landing gracefully despite the chaos. Bakugo, Todoroki and the others, meanwhile, were thrown back, struggling to stay on their feet against the overwhelming force. As for Kaminari and Midoriya, they were further away, so they only had to crouch down slightly, bracing themselves as the waves of pressure washed over them. Holy crap! Kaminari exclaimed, watching the battle unfold in awe. Is this real life or are we in Dragon Ball? Even 70 meters away, all he could make out were blurry outlines of All Might and Nomu. Their arms moved so fast they were barely visible, even as afterimages. It was as if two giants were locked in silent combat at the center of a hurricane, their movements too fast for the eye to follow. This is the power of the top heroes. Tetsu stammered, watching the scene in disbelief. His usual confidence was shaken, and he looked to his classmates with wide eyes. Damn it, I can't even get close. Shigaraki growled in frustration, looking toward All Might and Nomu with a mixture of shock and irritation. He clenched his fists, coming to a grim realization. Kurogiri, he said, his voice laced with a sinister edge. Forget All Might for now. Teleport us over to the kids. Even if Nomu can't take him down, as long as we kill a single student, our mission won't be a total loss. Kurogiri nodded, understanding the dark intent behind Shigaraki's words. Without further delay, his shadowy form surrounded Shigaraki, and they both vanished. Kirishima, still bracing himself against the gale, looked around frantically. What should we do? We can't even get close to All Might. Like I know. Bakugo snapped, furious with his own inability to make a difference. The frustration and helplessness gnawed at him, his fists clenched in anger. Kaminari was right, Todoroki said, eyes narrowed as he created an ice wall to shield them from the wind. This isn't a fight we can interfere in. Despite his calm words, Todoroki's mind drifted to someone else he'd been trying to outdo all his life. Is this the level of power you were chasing all along, Endeavor? Look out! Kaminari's voice cut through the chaos, sparking with urgency. At that moment, Bakugo's reflexes kicked in. He spun around, instinctively raising his palm and firing an explosion directly behind him. Boom! The blast was deafening, sending smoke and flames billowing outward. Todoroki and the others shielded their faces, using their quirks to deflect the aftershock. As the smoke cleared, Shigaraki stood there, smirking despite the surprise attack. He looked at Bakugo with a twisted grin. Not bad. You sensed my approach without any warning. Impressive. Bakugo glared at him with fierce determination, his voice dripping with malice. You think you can sneak up on me? Try it again, and I'll blow you to pieces, you freak. Kaminari and Midoriya arrived just in time to hear this exchange. With the strongest students of Class 1A now gathered, they began to surround Shigaraki and Kurogiri, preparing for a standoff. Shigaraki ignored Bakugo's threat and instead sized him up with newfound interest. You'd make a great villain, you know? You're practically one already. Bakugo snarled, shut up. I'll kill you. Everyone, split them up. Kaminari shouted, quickly assessing the situation. We need to isolate him. Bakugo, keep that smoke guy busy. Tetsu, Kirishima, support him. Bakugo didn't even bother responding. With a glare of defiance, he launched himself toward Kurogiri, explosions at the ready. Don't tell me what to do, you damn spark plug. Todoroki, meanwhile, silently took Kaminari's orders to heart. He summoned a towering wall of ice, separating Shigaraki from Kurogiri and forcing them into two separate battles. The towering ice wall gleamed, and for a brief moment, Kaminari couldn't help but admire the sheer power Todoroki wielded. The son of Endeavor sure knew how to make an entrance. Todoroki glided back down on an ice slide, landing beside Kaminari. His expression remained stoic. You wanted him isolated? Now's your chance. Right. Kaminari grinned, taking out a coin and aiming it at Shigaraki, who was now dodging Todoroki's icy onslaught like a ninja. From behind, Midoriya was clearly overwhelmed. He shifted from foot to foot, looking between both battles, unsure where to lend his aid. What should I do? Kaminari didn't spare him a glance. No clue. Just don't get in the way. Look for an opening if you see one. By this point, Shigaraki was only about 10 meters away, closing in as he weaved between the ice structures. Kaminari knew he couldn't afford to wait any longer. He aimed, his eyes narrowing. The railgun flashed. A golden streak of energy cut through the air at lightning speed, but Shigaraki had already predicted the attack. He sidestepped just as Kaminari fired, letting the shot whiz past him and dissipate harmlessly into the air, leaving behind a faint scent of sulfur. Ha! Shigaraki sneered, extending his hand toward Kaminari. It's just a fast bullet. As long as I can dodge it before you fire. His fingers reached for Kaminari's face, aiming to grip him with that deadly touch. Under the meticulous training of his master, he had undergone countless combat drills. Relying on his own strength and experience, he believed he could easily defeat these kids who had just entered high school. Become a sacrifice in my quest to overthrow this society, kid. Chapter 67, Million Volts and Plus Ultra. Kaminari. Midoriya shouted, watching helplessly from a distance as Shigaraki lunged at Kaminari. A deep sense of frustration surged within him, knowing he couldn't protect his friends the way All Might could if he had full control over One for All. Boom! Shigaraki shattered the ice barriers Todoroki had created, breaking through with a single strike as his hand reached for Kaminari's face, a deadly glint in his eyes. I don't care anymore. At this critical moment of life and death, Kaminari could no longer think about Todoroki or anyone beside him. In order to protect himself, he discharged electricity from his entire body without hesitation, trying to force Shigaraki back. With no time to lose, Kaminari activated his full discharge. 100,000 volts. Lightning crackled and surged around him, surrounding his body with an intense electric field. He hoped it would be enough to force Shigaraki back. For a moment, Shigaraki's advance slowed, his hand meeting the electric barrier Kaminari had created. But Kaminari's relief was short-lived. Shigaraki's hand continued to press forward, unaffected by the electricity. The gloves. Kaminari realized. Those gloves were insulated against electricity. This wasn't just a random attack, they had planned for situations like this. Desperation kicked in as he struggled to think of a way to escape. Just then, he managed to activate his high-speed movement, darting backward and grabbing Todoroki in the process. He pulled him out of harm's way, stumbling slightly as they landed back near Midoriya. Help me get him back on his feet, Kaminari said to Midoriya, pushing Todoroki toward him. He turned back to Shigaraki, still panting from the exertion. Shigaraki tilted his head, watching them curiously. What was that? Some kind of speed quirk? Or do you have more than one ability? Kaminari just sneered, trying to hide his exhaustion. Wouldn't you like to know? Maybe if you'd actually read a book or two, you'd realize how out of your depth you are. Enough. Shigaraki's voice was laced with fury, his fingers twitching with deadly intent. He looked to Kaminari with an unsettling grin. Now that your ice friend is out of the way, let's see how well you do alone. Shigaraki lunged again, and Kaminari acted fast. Reaching into his pocket, he grabbed the small pouch Momo had crafted for him earlier, containing 50 steel balls. He tossed them into the air, charging each with electricity, creating a shimmering barrier around them both. If you want me, you'll have to go through this first. Kaminari taunted, lightning dancing around him as he activated his ability. Chain lightning 500,000 volts. Electricity arced between each steel ball, forming a web of golden light that surrounded Shigaraki, trapping him in the center. As long as Kaminari kept supplying electricity, the barrier would hold, creating a cage of lightning. A slight smirk crossed his face. Let's see you dodge this. What? Shigaraki hesitated, eyeing the electrified field in front of him. He'd never encountered anything like this before. But Kaminari wasn't finished. Taking advantage of Shigaraki's pause, he rushed in, his body still charged with electricity. He leapt high above Shigaraki, lightning crackling around him, and extended his arms wide. His voice echoed with confidence and a calm fury. Feel the pain. Experience it. Accept it. Understand it. Those who don't know pain, they will never understand true peace. He paused, looking down at Shigaraki with a fierce gaze. 1,000,000 volts. With a roar, Kaminari unleashed the full extent of his power, a surge of blinding electricity crashing down like a thunderstorm. The entire battlefield lit up with a golden glow, bathing the surroundings in searing light and crackling energy. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone, the ground beneath them scorched by the intensity of the discharge. Even Midoriya, several meters away, had to shield his eyes from the overwhelming brightness. He could feel the heat through his closed eyelids, hear the thunderous roar that filled the air. Across the battlefield, Momo, Kyoka, and the others looked on in awe at the electrified whirlwind Kaminari had created. That's Kaminari! Momo gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Not far from there, All Might was nearing the end of his battle with Nomu, his time limit pushing dangerously close. His muscles trembled with exhaustion, yet he stood tall, still determined to protect his students. Villain, do you know what it means to be a hero? All Might's voice boomed with righteous anger, his face set in grim determination. It means you go beyond, you push yourself further than anyone else. He took a deep breath, focusing all his remaining power into his right fist. This would be his last chance. Plus Ultra. With one final, devastating punch, All Might's fist connected with Nomu's chest, sending shockwaves that echoed throughout the building. The sheer force was unimaginable, causing flames and debris to erupt upon impact. Nomu was launched upward, breaking through the ceiling of USJ and vanishing into the sky. All Might stumbled, his vision blurring. He could feel his body reaching its limit, steam beginning to rise from his skin. In my prime, I'd only need 5 punches for that, but today... He muttered to himself, grimacing. Today, I lost count. The shockwave of his final attack rippled through the USJ facility, shaking the other zones where the students were scattered. Tokoyami and Koda looked up, staring in disbelief as a hole was blasted through the ceiling. In the fire zone, Ojiro braced himself as heat and dust washed over him, his tail lashing in reflex. Was that All Might? At the entrance, Minato was sobbing uncontrollably, overwhelmed by both fear and relief. He's really here. All Might's really here. We're saved. Tetsu, who was pinning Kurogiri down with Kirishima, looked up at the ceiling in awe. The force of that punch, it broke straight through Kurogiri's defenses. Kirishima, catching his breath, looked on with admiration. This is what it means to be unbreakable. That's what I want to be, too, someone who can stand strong like All Might. Even Bakugo, standing in stunned silence, felt a shift within himself. As much as he despised feeling weak, watching All Might fight reminded him of why he wanted to become a hero. This is the world of real heroes. Amid the dust and debris, All Might took a few unsteady steps back, his vision blurring. He was nearly at his limit. But as he glanced around, he could see that the students were safe. His mission was accomplished. All Might. Hearing Midoriya's voice, All Might turned to see the boy approaching, supporting Todoroki on his shoulder. Behind them, Kaminari stood, breathing heavily, golden sparks still flickering around him from his massive discharge. What happened to you? Midoriya asked Kaminari, his voice filled with awe. Kaminari just smirked, swaying slightly as he tried to catch his breath. I went. Plus Ultra. Chapter 68, Sewage and Midnight. Just as Midoriya was hesitating over what to do next, he noticed something unsettling. Villains who had been taken down by Aizawa-sensei earlier were now staggering back to their feet. Most of them seemed like brute types, with tough bodies that could withstand a beating. These thugs, oblivious to the carnage around them, turned their bloodthirsty eyes toward Kaminari, Bakugo, and the rest of Class A. They let out wild cries and charged forward once more, undeterred by their earlier defeat. What did Shigaraki and the League of Villains promise these guys to make them so fanatically loyal? Midoriya wondered. He couldn't wrap his head around it. It was as though they'd been given something they were willing to die for. The truth was, no one on the hero side knew. They couldn't possibly understand. Only those who were in the league understood what the boss had offered them. Purpose. For those with quirks who had been abandoned by society, those who felt invisible and discarded, the league provided a sense of purpose. For those who were born quirkless, like Midoriya had once been, or who were frustrated with their seemingly weak quirks, they offered an opportunity, a chance to gain power, a chance to evolve. Purpose and opportunity, two words that were powerful motivators, especially when wielded by someone who had ruled the underworld for decades. They were more than enough to inspire fierce loyalty among the downtrodden, combined with the allure of his own powerful quirk. What should I do? What should I do? Midoriya's mind raced as he glanced between All Might, who stood in the distance enveloped in faint wisps of steam, and Kaminari, who was still dazed from his short-circuited high-voltage attack. Just then, Todoroki freed himself from Midoriya's support and gave Kaminari a complicated look, though his expression remained as stoic as ever. Good, then Kaminari's all yours, Midoriya said with relief, then sprinted toward All Might. Behind the towering ice wall, Bakugo and Kirishima held the line, with Tetsu pinning down Kurogiri. Suddenly, the loud crack of a gunshot rang out, drawing everyone's attention. More shots followed, each bullet finding its mark in the legs or arms of the villain minions, halting their advance. Finally, they're here. All Might's tense expression softened in relief. I'm sorry we're late, everyone. Came the voice of the principal, perched atop Vlad's shoulder, with a group of other hero teachers fanning out behind him. I called everyone who could respond immediately. Ida. Eureka's eyes widened with joy as she spotted her class rep standing at the edge of the group. Ida Tinya of Class 1A, reporting for duty. Ida's voice boomed, his enthusiasm clear as he saluted the principal. His voice echoed across USJ, commanding everyone's attention and earning admiration from his classmates. The booming announcement seemed to jolt Kaminari out of his short-circuited state. He blinked, quickly looking around and taking in the bewildered expressions of his classmates, especially Todoroki, who was watching him with an unreadable gaze. Realizing what had happened, Kaminari felt his face heat up with embarrassment. He muttered to himself as he approached Todoroki. Then, leaning in close, he whispered in Todoroki's ear with a slight grin. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll fry you. Todoroki raised an eyebrow, unfazed, and stepped back. Midoriya saw it too, he replied in his usual deadpan tone. Kaminari's eye twitched. Same goes for him. If either of you blabs, you're in for daily electrotherapy. Immature, Todoroki muttered, looking away as if Kaminari's threat wasn't even worth acknowledging. With a sigh of resignation, Kaminari turned around, only to be met by another strange sight. A dark, foul-smelling sludge appeared out of thin air around Shigaraki and Kurogiri. The stench was so overpowering that Tetsu, who had been holding Kurogiri down, instinctively let go and staggered back, covering his nose in disgust. What the? Before anyone could react, the sludge fully enveloped Shigaraki, then vanished with a wet plop, leaving nothing but a lingering foul odor and damp stains on the ground. The same thing happened to Kurogiri on the other side of the ice wall, as he disappeared right in front of Cementos, Bakugo, and the others. Well, that's just great, Kaminari muttered, scratching his head. Seems like every villain these days has some kind of teleportation quirk. At that moment, a voice addressed him from nearby. Did you cause all of this? Kaminari turned to see the sultry, whip-wielding hero Midnight watching him with an intense gaze. Her eyes were fixed on the scorched ground where Kaminari had unleashed his million-volt attack, a patch of earth that now lay blackened and lifeless. Yeah, that was me, Kaminari replied, somewhat sheepishly. He glanced at the charred area, still littered with the remnants of his steel ball arsenal. Midnight's gaze lingered on the destruction for a moment before her lips curved into a smirk. Kaminari, you're stronger than I expected. Kaminari shrugged, his usual bravado returning. Well, I try. Midnight's expression shifted, her tone turning serious. But remember, strength is only valuable if it's used responsibly. Power like yours, if it's misused, it can lead to serious consequences. Understood. Kaminari nodded, appreciating her words of caution. But then, to his surprise, Midnight's expression softened into a sly smile. By the way, what's your phone number? Hey! Chapter 69, Shadows and News. In a darkened room somewhere in Japan, dozens of monitors cast a flickering glow, illuminating the area with an eerie light. Plop! Plop! Two foul-smelling puddles of sludge splattered onto the ground, each depositing a battered figure Tomura Shigaraki and Kurogiri. I never thought this new quirk would first be used to save you two. A tall, shadowy figure turned in his swivel chair, his gaze settling on the scorched, beaten form of Tomura. His voice was low and rasping, laced with disdain. He surveyed Tomura's injuries, taking note of the blackened burns covering his body. Electric burns? Not exactly. A man in a lab coat stepped forward from the shadows, his glasses glinting ominously as he examined Tomura with a detached, clinical air. It's more likely he was hit by a high-voltage electric discharge. Fortunately, his combat suit absorbed some of the damage. He'll live. Electricity. The shadowy figure paused, pondering. There are no pro-heroes with lightning-type quirks that come to mind. He turned his gaze to Kurogiri, who seemed weakened but intact, his misty form swirling slowly. Tell me what happened. Kurogiri, casting a brief glance at Tomura being taken away by the doctor, gave a respectful nod. He began recounting the events at UA, detailing the chaos, the unexpected resistance, and the near-fatal encounter with the students. Meanwhile, back at UA High School, the situation was still in flux. Midnight's unexpected request had left Kaminari at a bit of a loss. After some negotiation, he'd finally agreed to join her for the occasional morning jog. In truth, he didn't want to. He'd been using those early morning hours in Omiya Park to test and refine his quirk abilities away from prying eyes. But Midnight had assured him her time was limited, that she could only run for about 30 minutes each day, and often not every day. She'd need to leave by 5:30 to fulfill her own obligations. Given her understanding, Kaminari had reluctantly accepted. 15 minutes after midnight and the students had left, a swarm of police cars surrounded the facility, flashing lights reflecting off the walls of the building. And, as expected, a crowd of reporters had followed close behind, their cameras and microphones ready for action. They were like sharks scenting blood in the water. But today, the police weren't in a cooperative mood. They established a perimeter around UA and flatly refused to let any of the reporters get closer. We're issuing a strict warning, a police officer announced to the gathered media. Any attempts to bypass the perimeter will result in your immediate removal and possible charges. Consider yourselves warned. The reporters, surprisingly, complied without much resistance. In fact, they looked positively thrilled. An attack on UA High School by villains, during a student training session no less? This was headline news. The reporters could already imagine tomorrow's papers flying off the shelves, and the bonuses waiting for them as a reward. They were content to wait. Once the police and heroes emerged, they'd pounce, snapping photos and shouting questions. Getting even the briefest quotes or shots of the teachers or police officers would be enough to write their initial stories. They could fill in the details later. Inside the gates of UA, police officers and hero teachers were working in tandem to round up the defeated villains, who were now being led out in handcuffs toward waiting police vans. The sight of the shackled villains being led to the convoy sent a ripple of excitement through the reporters, who began snapping photos in a frenzy. Flash! Flash! The gate of UA lit up under the barrage of camera flashes, capturing the villains' defiant or downcast expressions as they were marched away. The newer police officers found themselves squinting under the bright lights, not yet accustomed to the blinding glare of the press. Meanwhile, on the other side of the facility, Principal Nizu and the teachers were overseeing the students as they boarded the buses. Reporters weren't allowed on this side, thanks to the police blocking all access points. 16, 17, 18, 19. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi muttered to himself, counting the students as they exited the building. Looks like everyone's accounted for, except for Midoriya, who's being treated for his leg injuries, he confirmed, sighing in relief. He and Officer Sansa Tamakawa, the cat-headed officer, exchanged a glance, each clearly relieved. If there had been even one casualty, they'd be facing an unimaginable level of scrutiny and pressure. Let's allow the kids to head back, Detective Tsukachi decided, waving his subordinates back. They've been through enough for today. We'll question them another time if necessary. Officer Sansa nodded, watching the students with a somber expression. Hero Society almost made a grave mistake today. Nearby, Ashido, Eureka, and the other girls clustered together, asking after Aizawa-sensei and 13. When they learned both teachers would make a full recovery despite their injuries, a collective sigh of relief spread through the group. Both Aizawa and 13 had risked everything to protect them, and the students felt a renewed sense of gratitude toward their teachers. Just as they lined up to board the buses, Principal Nizu emerged with Midnight and the sniper hero beside him. Detective Tsukachi quickly approached them. Principal, as a precaution, we'd like permission to search every corner of the school. Nizu nodded without hesitation. Of course. Though some teachers may voice concerns, I believe your presence here is important. And searching is what you officers do best, after all. Detective Tsukachi smiled, appreciative of Nizu's cooperation. He turned to Officer Sansa. Arrange a full search of the campus, immediately. By the time Kaminari and the others finally returned to UA, the sky was awash with the colors of sunset, casting a beautiful orange glow over the campus. Despite the breathtaking view, most students were simply exhausted. Having faced life and death situations, all they wanted was to go home, find some peace, and recover. Even Kaminari, who usually had training plans or study sessions with Momo after school, was too drained to think about anything else. Dragging himself through his front door, Kaminari barely had time to call out before he found himself wrapped in a tight hug from his mom, who had rushed over from the living room. His dad followed closely behind, visibly shaken. "My baby, are you okay?" His mother cried, looking him over frantically. "Are you hurt anywhere? Let me see." Chapter 70, Family and Fighting. Kaminari looked at his mother, who was crying, and hugged her tightly, concern evident in his gaze as he glanced over her worried expression. He spoke softly, feeling a pang of guilt. "You already know, hey? Yeah, we got a call from UA about an hour ago." His father sighed, then looked over at his wife. "Your mom was so worried she was ready to book a flight and head straight there." At that moment, his mother looked up with an almost pleading expression. "Son, maybe it's time to leave this hero stuff behind. Wouldn't it be nice to just sing and paint instead?" Kaminari fell silent. He understood his mother's concerns, but he wasn't ready to give up on UA so easily. It wasn't that he had some desperate need to be a hero, but he'd come this far, and he at least wanted to pass the licensing exam. And he found he actually enjoyed the thrill of fighting. "Ah, I figured you'd feel that way," she said softly, resigning herself. "Forget it, do what you want." But then, his mother looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Just promise me you'll stay safe. Promise me that nothing bad will happen to you. You have to understand, son, your life isn't just your own anymore. Promise me, okay?" At her words, Kaminari could no longer hold back his emotions. He hugged her tightly, his voice choked with emotion. "I promise, Mom. I'll be safe. I promise." "All right, let's head back to the living room to calm down," his father said, voice trembling as he struggled to keep his own emotions in check. "We'll have dinner, and our son can rest afterward. We can talk about everything else tomorrow." As the head of the family, Kaminari's father felt he needed to stay composed. If he lost his cool, the whole family would fall apart. Later that evening, they received another call from UA. The school informed them that Class 1A would have a day off tomorrow, with regular classes resuming the day after. This small gesture seemed to soothe the parents' concerns somewhat. It showed that UA was at least trying to be considerate of their feelings. UA's strong reputation over the years was enough to earn the benefit of the doubt. They were just relieved their son had come home safe. The next day, Kaminari skipped his usual morning jog and study session, while his father stayed home from work. The family spent the day together, enjoying homemade side dishes prepared by his mother and watching TV. However, the news was filled with reports of heroes being attacked, and Kaminari even spotted a few short clips featuring himself and his classmates. He couldn't help but wonder how those reporters managed to get those photos of him and the others. It seemed that his classmates were in similar situations. Most parents had chosen to comfort their shaken children with warmth and affection. Surprisingly, it was effective by the end of the day. Many were already laughing and chatting about the events of the day before. On the third day, Kaminari met up with Tetsu, and they took the Shinkansen back to UA. Together. As they entered the classroom, they saw that Yurika, Midoriya, Bakugo, Jiro, and Tokoyami were already there. "Yo, Kaminari." Tetsu. "Good morning, everyone." Kaminari greeted them cheerfully, heading to his seat. As he settled in, he leaned over to Midoriya and whispered, "By the way, you better forget everything you saw yesterday." "Hey? What are you talking about?" Midoriya blinked in confusion, but then Kaminari's strange expressions and behavior from yesterday came rushing back to his mind. With an awkward laugh, he quickly reassured him, "Don't worry, I I won't tell anyone. Good. I'd hate for you to experience a million-volt reminder, Kaminari chuckled, patting Midoriya on the shoulder. No need, I get it. Midoriya nodded in a flustered panic. He'd been standing closest to Kaminari yesterday, and he was all too aware of the terrifying power of Kaminari's million-volt move. As the classroom filled up, everyone naturally began chatting and exchanging greetings. However, soon, an unspoken understanding passed through the room, and a quiet anticipation settled over the students. It was time for class, but they all had one question on their minds: who would be their homeroom teacher today? Aizawa-sensei had been hospitalized after the recent attack. Their questions were soon answered when the door opened, and a bandage-wrapped figure walked in, surprising everyone. Good morning. Aizawa-sensei. Isn't that recovery a bit too fast? More like too dedicated, if you ask me. Ida, the class rep, raised his hand and asked loudly, Teacher, are you all right? Does he look all right? Yurika muttered from her seat behind Ida, her voice tinged with concern. Despite his injuries, Aizawa made his way up to the podium with calm steps. His voice was steady, if a bit hoarse. Whether I'm all right or not isn't important. What matters is that the fight isn't over yet. His words immediately captured everyone's attention. Mineta, the most nervous among them, looked particularly pale, fearing another villain attack. The UA Sports Festival is coming up. With those words, the heavy atmosphere lifted, and excitement sparked through the room. Even Kaminari couldn't help feeling a surge of anticipation. He'd been in this world long enough to know just how important the UA Sports Festival was. Finally! It's happening! Kirishima jumped up, slamming his hands on the desk. A true school-wide event. Kyoka raised a skeptical eyebrow. But, sensei, we were just attacked by villains. Is it really safe to hold a sports festival right now? Yeah, what if they attack again? Ojiro asked cautiously. Then we'll crush them. Bakugo growled, fists clenched with a fierce glint in his eyes. Aizawa, looking rather tired, lifted his right arm encased in plaster. Quite the opposite, actually. The school intends to use this sports festival to show the world how effective our crisis management system is. He continued, I heard security will be 5 times stronger than in previous years. Raising his head slightly, he looked out over his students, his injured eyes trying to focus. More importantly, the UA Sports Festival is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for all of you. We can't just cancel it because of a few villains. Besides, he added, our sports festival is a major national event in Japan. It's not something the school can just decide to cancel. Aizawa went on to explain some basic information about the upcoming festival, a standard briefing, really, and soon after, class was dismissed. Even as they left the classroom, Kirishima, Bakugo, and a few others were still buzzing with excitement. Early April, hey? That's only a month to prepare. Thinking it over, Kaminari turned to Tetsu. Hey, want to start sparring together to get ready? Tetsu scratched his head, looking a little embarrassed. I might not have time in the afternoon. My judo instructor, Mr. Daimon, has been starting formal lessons recently. After a pause, he added, but I'm free in the morning if that works. Kaminari shook his head. Nah, you should use the mornings to get more rest. If you're practicing late, you'll need all the quality sleep you can get. But what about you? Tetsu asked, concerned. Kaminari simply shrugged. Don't worry about me. I was training on my own before I even met you. With that, he glanced down at his right hand, a thoughtful look crossing his face. Besides, that move, it's almost ready. Chapter 71, The Fire and Meeting the Parents. In the days that followed, Kaminari's life returned to normal. Every morning, he woke up early and took the subway to Omiya Park for his usual morning jog. Sometimes, he was joined by Midnight Sensei, but as she'd told him before, she wasn't the type to push him hard. She kept her word, too. If she said they'd stop at 5:30, they'd stop at exactly 5:30, not a minute more. When time was up, she'd just give him a nod and head off without him needing to say a word. This made Kaminari grow quite fond of her as a teacher. Moreover, during their jogs, he'd pick up tidbits about hero laws from Midnight, along with tips on handling various emergencies without using his quirk. Though it might seem trivial to some, Kaminari knew that this knowledge could be a game-changer in a crisis. Meanwhile, with the efforts of pro-heroes and the police, the media frenzy about the hero attacks started to die down, gradually being washed away by other news stories. Sure, a few people still whispered about it here and there, but it no longer dominated headlines. If anyone took the time to think about it, they'd remember, but for most people, it was a closed chapter. After all, no one had died in the incident, no students, no teachers. If that had been the case, the story would have been much different. As the buzz around hero attacks faded, a new craze took over the Japanese entertainment scene, Aim to be a Pokemon Master, a song Kaminari had released with his Pikachu band. To be fair, it wasn't that the song was some musical masterpiece. The hype was largely thanks to a brilliant marketing campaign. After all, Kaminari's band had the backing of two major partners, Mitsui and the Yae Orozu family. These two titans of industry weren't exactly entertainment-focused, but with their massive financial resources, they could make anything popular with the snap of their fingers. And now, the two of them had joined forces. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Almost every major website in Japan was plastered with photos of Kaminari, Kyoka, and Momo, along with eye-catching ads for the song. And as the cherry on top, it was promoted as the official theme for Pikachu's new anime, Pokemon. The marketing team was clever. Framing the song as part of the Pokemon launch not only promoted the song itself but also built up anticipation for the anime. Soon enough, Japanese netizens were looking at the posters featuring Kaminari and Pikachu, surrounded by various adorable Pokemon, and humming along to the catchy tune of Aim to be a Pokemon Master. People who hadn't been particularly interested in the anime found themselves curious about Pokemon. To fan the flames even further, Kaminari's father smartly posted sneak peeks and character designs of new Pokemon on the company's official website, keeping the hype alive. The results? Kaminari was famous. Kyoka was famous. Even Momo was famous. This wasn't just a small spark, it was a full-blown wildfire, especially in cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto. Their faces could be seen everywhere, from subway stations to billboards. Mitsui and Yae Orozu were clearly sparing no expense. When companies that size decide to back something, they don't hold back. They go all out. Nowhere was this more apparent than in Akihabara, Japan's otaku hub. Although the anime hadn't even aired yet, the streets were already filled with claw machines stocked with Pokemon plus highs. These cute Pokemon characters were already drawing crowds. The machines had 4 plushie options: Charmander, Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and, of course, Pikachu. Unlike the others, though, Pikachu was a rare find, just one per machine. It seemed that even the Japanese knew how to play up exclusivity. Everywhere you looked, posters of the Pokemon anime lined the streets, and Aim to be a Pokemon Master played in a constant loop. By the end of a few days, even casual passers-by could hum parts of the song. All that was left was the official release. Finally, the big day arrived. It was Saturday, and Kaminari's father and Mitsui had decided to premiere the anime over the weekend. 2 episodes would air on Sunday, and after that, it'd be 1 episode every Saturday. Around noon, Kaminari decided to skip his usual cafeteria lunch and headed to Kyoka's house instead. He was going to meet someone important. "Hello, ma'am." The moment he followed Kyoka inside, Kaminari was greeted by her mother, a striking woman with purple hair and an artistic air. She had the same distinctive earjack earlobes as her daughter, and Kaminari bowed respectfully as he greeted her. "Welcome." Kyoka's mother adjusted her glasses and smiled warmly. "You must be Kaminari Denki, my daughter's band leader. My little Kyoka always talks about you." Kaminari couldn't help but glance at Jiro beside him, surprised. Mom." Kyoka's face turned a deep shade of red as she spluttered, "Don't say things like that." It was clear that, for all her tough exterior, she was still a bit of a shy girl in front of her mom. All right, come in," her mother chuckled, leading them inside. "Kazuma's already upstairs." "Is he?" Kyoka raised an eyebrow, her embarrassment quickly replaced by her usual confidence. "So why isn't he down here already?" Her mother just chuckled, glancing at Kaminari with a knowing look. "He's about to face the most important interview of his life, or so he thinks. He's upstairs in your room, playing the piano to calm his nerves." Playing the piano to relieve stress? Kaminari couldn't help but smile to himself, finding the situation amusing. He gestured for Jiro to lead the way up to the 2nd floor. Her mother, meanwhile, went to the kitchen, saying she'd prepare some snacks. As they approached Kyoka's room, Kaminari could hear the faint sound of an electronic keyboard playing aim to be a Pokemon master. Hey! I wonder if that's a coincidence or if he's really trying to make an impression. Kaminari thought with a smirk and motioned for Jiro to open the door. Kriaak! As the door opened, Kaminari's smile froze. It wasn't that the playing was especially good or bad, it was the sheer volume. Come on in. Jiro grabbed his arm and quickly pulled him inside, closing the door behind them to muffle the noise. Ugh, what's up with Kazama? He's copying my worst habit, cranking the volume all the way up. Kyoka muttered, looking annoyed as she glanced at the blue-haired boy who was completely engrossed in the music. Kaminari sighed, leaning close to Jiro's ear. Should we let him know we're here? We don't have much time. I don't know. Kyoka replied, leaning back towards him with a sigh. Kazama's, well, he's a gentle soul. A bit too kind for his own good, really. But when he gets mad, he really gets mad. Luckily, it seemed Kazama was finishing up. As they waited, the last few notes of the song trailed off, and the blue-haired boy finally took his hands off the keyboard. As he looked up, his gaze landed on Kaminari and Kyoka, who stood there looking a little too close for comfort. But Kazama, dressed in his black school uniform with blue hair and piercing blue eyes, seemed to see only one person. Kyoka. Chapter 72, Promise and Flowing Clouds. Kyoka smiled at Kazama's eagerness, and once he was standing in front of Kaminari, she raised a hand to formally introduce them. Kaminari, this is the keyboard player I recommended to you, Kazama-jin. He's a first-year student in the hero course at Sejin High School. Then she turned to Kazama. And this is... Kaminari waved his hand, stepping forward with a friendly grin and offering a handshake. Kaminari Denki, first-year hero course student at UA. Hi. Nice to meet you. Ah, hello. Kazama glanced at Kaminari's hand, hesitated for a brief moment, then shook it with a gentle, almost refined touch, giving off a calm and graceful vibe. He seemed different from earlier when he'd greeted Kyoka. There had been an undeniable spark of excitement in his eyes when he saw her. But now, facing Kaminari, his expression was subdued, showing only a polite curiosity. All right, now that the introductions are done, let's get straight to the point, Kaminari said, stepping past Kazama and moving to stand near Kyoka's electronic keyboard. He glanced around the room, taking in its cozy atmosphere. I'm guessing you're on a bit of a time crunch too, right? Kazama nodded, getting to the heart of things. You've already heard me play, and I really admire the songs you've written. I'd be thrilled to join the Pikachu band. Kaminari didn't answer right away, instead shifting gears with an unexpected question. I heard from Kyoka that you're not actually interested in becoming a professional hero. So why did you apply to the hero course in the first place? And when you didn't get into a top school, you still chose the hero course at Sejin. Kazama's expression shifted slightly. He glanced at Kyoka, who stayed silent, and then looked back at Kaminari. I'm really not interested in being a hero, he admitted. I only took the exam because Kyoka wanted to. For me, it didn't matter whether I ended up in the general studies program or the hero course. Inwardly, he thought, the real reason is because it gave me another thing in common with Kyoka. But I didn't pass the UA entrance exam, so here I am. Kaminari sighed. I see. So that's probably why you didn't pass the UA exam, and why your grades in the hero course at Sejin aren't great. He looked at Kazama thoughtfully. You've never focused on strengthening your quirk, and you don't care about getting a hero license, right? Kazama's face soured slightly. Pretty much. My dream is to be a famous musician. Instead of wasting time on quirks, I'd rather spend it listening to music and practicing. Does this have anything to do with joining the band? He asked, clearly a bit irked. Actually, yes, it does. Kaminari nodded, speaking as if it were obvious. Because this Pikachu band isn't just some ordinary band. Hey! Kazama blinked in confusion. What did he mean, not an ordinary band? Don't you get it yet, dummy? Kyoka interjected with a sigh, clearly a bit exasperated. Think about it, who am I, who is Momo, and who is Kaminari? Kazama's blue eyes widened as he processed this. Aren't you all heroes? Wait. He turned to Kaminari, eyes widening in realization. You want to form a band made up entirely of heroes? Not quite, Kaminari corrected, shaking his head slightly. It's a band made up of strong heroes, not just any heroes. With a determined look, he continued, I don't just want to be the top superstar. I want to be the best lightning quirk user in the world. And if you're going to be part of this band, you'll have to aim for greatness too. Kazama stared at him, mouth open in shock, then turned to Kyoka. Kyoka met Kaminari's gaze, a spark of determination in her eyes, and then nodded firmly. Kazama was momentarily speechless. Kaminari stepped closer, his expression serious. If you're not willing to grow stronger and put in the effort, you're not qualified to join the Pikachu band. Kazama looked down, deep in thought. Kaminari sighed, figuring the answer was clear. He whispered to Kyoka, sorry, let's go. Yet. Kyoka cast one last glance at Kazama, a hint of disappointment in her eyes. She cared about him, they'd been friends for years. Kazama was always gentle and kind, especially towards her. But his lack of drive outside of music was frustrating. As they reached the door, Kazama's voice stopped them. Wait. Kaminari turned back, but Kazama wasn't looking at him. Instead, his gaze was focused on Kyoka. Are you sure you want to go along with this craziness? Kyoka didn't hesitate. She nodded firmly, and Kazama's shoulders slumped slightly. All right then. He turned to Kaminari, a hint of a smile on his face. How can I prove to you that I'm serious about getting stronger? Kaminari raised an eyebrow. Really? You can change your mind that quickly? Kazama chuckled to himself, it's not about my dream. It's about standing by Kyoka's side. Look, I know just saying I'll do it won't be enough for you. So give me a condition, Kazama replied, his voice steady. Kaminari considered him thoughtfully, then his face brightened with an idea. All right. You've heard of the provisional hero license exam that hero course students across the country take, right? Kazama nodded, already guessing where this was going. That's right, Kaminari confirmed. If you pass and earn a provisional hero license, I'll formally invite you to join the Pikachu band as our keyboardist. He held out his hand. So, do we have a deal? Deal. Kazama responded immediately, shaking Kaminari's hand with renewed confidence. He wasn't one for hesitation, and once he'd made up his mind, there was no going back. When the time comes, I'll be waiting for that invitation. His eyes drifted to Kyoka, a quiet determination in his gaze. No matter what, I'll be by your side. I gave up my grades and focused on music for you. Now, I'll give my all to become stronger for you too. Kyoka couldn't read his thoughts, but she was still thrilled by his decision, a small smile lighting up her face. Kaminari tilted his head curiously. By the way, I don't think I ever asked what's your quirk? You don't seem to have any visible physical mutation. Kazama lifted his azure bangs with a casual gesture. It's an engine-type quirk. He raised one hand, palm open, and after a brief pause, a gentle, white cloud-like mist began to gather in his hand. They call it flowing cloud. He glanced up at the ceiling, and then, almost absent-mindedly, raised his arms, watching the mist swirl around his palms. Chapter 73, Meeting Again. Can you, actually make the clouds appear? Kaminari considered Kazama's quirk, flowing clouds, and observed the mist gathering in Kazama's hand. He began piecing together what his ability might entail. Yes, I can summon clouds and mist, Kazama nodded, then added with a sheepish smile, but only if there are clouds in the sky above. Kaminari thought for a moment, then hesitantly asked, so, how does that work in a fight? Can you use it to obscure vision or something? He was really wondering how such a quirk could be effective in combat. Kazama fell silent, gazing down at the mist swirling in his palm. After a pause, he finally murmured, I honestly don't know. I've never really focused on using my quirk in that way. Kaminari rubbed his temples, sighing in exasperation. Then how do you plan to get stronger? Even Kyoka seemed stumped, racking her brain for ways a cloud-creating ability could be useful in battle. But besides blocking someone's vision, like Kaminari suggested, nothing practical came to mind. Don't worry, Kazama replied with a calm smile, seemingly unfazed by the challenge. I'll figure it out. I promised I'd get that provisional license, and I intend to keep that promise. With that, he turned to Kyoka and said, I might need some advice on improving my quirk. I'll be counting on you, Kyoka. Sure, I'll help if I can, Kyoka replied, though she sounded a bit unsure. All right then, Kaminari said with a shrug. Kazama seemed confident enough, so he decided to let it go, though he couldn't help pondering flowing clouds himself, wondering if he could recall any similar quirks from his favorite anime back in his past life. With that, the three of them went downstairs to the kitchen, where Kyoka's mother had prepared refreshments. After thanking her for the snacks, they parted ways at the door. Naturally, Kaminari and Kyoka left together. As they walked away, Kazama stayed behind, watching them. He let the gentle breeze lift his blue hair, his gaze following Kyoka as she strolled beside Kaminari. There was something different in the way she acted around Kaminari. She seemed almost shy. It wasn't how she usually behaved with him. Maybe she just feels a bit nervous around the band's leader, Kazama thought, brushing off the feeling. Alright, time to head back, he muttered to himself. He looked up at the wide blue sky and the few drifting clouds before decisively turning around and heading home. Meanwhile, as they walked together, Kyoka glanced over at Kaminari. Do you think there's a way Kazama could use his cloud quirk in battle? She really wanted to help her friend figure it out. Kaminari scratched his head. He was still mulling it over. He liked analyzing different quirks, but flowing clouds was a tricky one. After a pause, he suggested, maybe, he could use his quirk to give himself a speed or strength boost, like with propulsion. Propulsion. Jiro tilted her head, trying to imagine it. If that's too hard, Kaminari continued, he could train in stealth techniques. Using clouds to obscure visibility, he could try something like a silent takedown. Kyoka's face immediately twisted with a frown. Kaminari, Kazama wants to be a hero. Silent takedowns sound way too much like a villain move. Kaminari just laughed. Kyoka, a quirk is just a tool. It's neither good nor evil on its own. It's how you use it that matters. Jiro sighed, crossing her arms thoughtfully. Then maybe we can call it something else, like, I don't know, a silent rescue instead. Kaminari chuckled, shaking his head. We don't even know the full extent of Kazama's quirk yet. He didn't exactly give us much to go on. Just being able to summon clouds doesn't tell us enough to figure out his potential. Honestly, Kaminari wasn't entirely convinced Kazama had what it took to become stronger. And even if he did, he wondered just how far he could go with a quirk like that. Soon enough, they returned to UA for their afternoon classes. Today's combat training was led by All Might again, and they were once more split into hero and villain teams, with a few tweaks to the rules and setting. Overall, it was an enjoyable session. After all, they weren't allowed to use their quirks freely outside of class, so these practical exercises were the perfect outlet. After school, Kaminari didn't take Momo's luxury car home like he usually did. Instead, he walked with Tetsu to the Shizuoka subway station. Momo had mentioned during their tutoring session that she had a family gathering that evening, so Kaminari agreed to head home on his own. After all, she was already going out of her way to help him, it only made sense that she'd have her own family commitments. As they exited the subway station in Saitama City, they noticed a small crowd gathered around a large tree on the sidewalk. The sound of a child crying floated over from the group, full of distress and panic. Kaminari and Tetsu exchanged a glance, thinking the same thing: was someone bullying a child? Without another word, they moved forward, ready to intervene. As they got closer, however, they overheard someone saying that there was a cat stuck up in the tree. Among the crowd was a short, stocky man who was trying to calm down a little boy, who clung to his leg, sobbing. Sia-chan. Yaa. Sia-chan's gone. I want Sia-chan back. The little boy's face was red and streaked with tears, and he clung desperately to his father's leg, crying his heart out. His father patted him on the back, looking both exasperated and regretful. He mumbled to himself, I knew I shouldn't have let him hold the leash. Now the cat's stuck up there. So, it's just a cat, hey. Tetsu sighed, sounding a bit disappointed. He'd been hoping for a more heroic scenario, maybe even a fight. Yeah, but that tree's pretty tall, Kaminari noted, looking up. He could probably get up there with a burst of Godspeed, but this was technically outside hero territory, and using his quirk would be against the law for such a minor issue. Hey, that's a nice-looking tabby cat. Pretty chubby, too. A voice suddenly interrupted. They turned to see a tall, thin boy with a familiar face, stopping nearby on his bicycle. He glanced up at the cat and seemed to recognize its breed immediately. The boy got off his bike, approached the crowd, and asked the boy's father, if you call its name, will it respond? sometimes, yet. The father looked a bit puzzled but went along with it. Kaminari recognized the newcomer at once, it was the seaweed-haired boy he'd met at the shopping district a while back. Alright then, what's its name? The purple-haired boy asked. Sia-chan. Her name's Sia-chan. The little boy answered, sniffling, hope lighting up in his tear-stained face. Can you help me get her back? Let's give it a try. The boy gave a reassuring smile, then addressed the crowd, after I call her name, everyone else join in, okay? Keep calling until she responds. The father exchanged a bewildered look with his son but nodded, willing to give it a shot. Anything was better than nothing at this point. Sia-chan. Look over here. Meow. With a completely serious expression, the boy started meowing up at the cat, imitating cat sounds without an ounce of embarrassment. His meows were startlingly realistic, almost like he'd been practicing. Meow, meow, meow. Then, something surprising happened. Before the father or the crowd could start calling, the cat actually responded. The boy smiled to himself and muttered, "What a good kitty." "All right, Sia-chan, come on down from there." To everyone's astonishment, the chubby black and white tabby began carefully making its way down the tree, tugging the leash along as it climbed. The onlookers gasped in surprise. "Good kitty." The boy crouched down, gently picking up the cat and cradling it in his arms. After giving it a few gentle strokes, he handed it to the little boy, who took it with a wide grin. To prevent another runaway, the boy handed the leash to the father, making sure they had a firm grip on it this time. "Is that his quirk?" Kaminari murmured to himself as he watched. "He calls, and if the other person answers, he can control them." Intrigued, Kaminari approached him. "Hey, wait a sec. Can we talk for a bit? You're a hero course student too, right?" The boy turned around, squinting his fish-like eyes at Kaminari while still holding onto his bike. "Yeah, so, you're in the hero course too. I'm Kaminari Denki, class 1A at UA. Hi. How about you?" Tetsu looked between the two, surprised. This was the first time he'd seen Kaminari go out of his way to introduce himself like this. "Hero course. Hitachi Shinso, General Studies, Class C," the boy replied casually. Before Kaminari could ask anything more, Shinso swung a leg over his bike and waved. "Sorry, but I've got to get to work at the car shop. Let's chat next time." With that, he pedaled away, leaving Kaminari watching his back in silence. As Shinso disappeared into the distance, Kaminari sighed, thinking, "Guess there'll be other chances. Living in Saitama and wanting to be a hero. I'll definitely get to know more about your quirk." Chapter 74, Hero's Invitation. Today was Saturday, the highly anticipated day when Pokemon, starring Kaminari, was set to officially premiere on TV Tokyo. At 3:10 in the afternoon, Class 1A's hero course was granted a rare early dismissal, ending all lessons after the 6th period. Classes were done for the day. As soon as Aizawa-sensei left, the students began clearing their desks and chatting excitedly about the weekend. Kaminari flashed a charming smile and addressed the class, inviting everyone to take an hour out of their evening to watch the first episode of Pokemon. "You've got to see it," he said confidently. "Even though I won't appear until tomorrow's episode, you don't want to miss it." Kyoka and Momo, standing nearby, backed him up, urging their friends like Yurika, Azui, and the others to tune in as well. "Ha, I already knew!" Mina Ashido exclaimed, pumping her pink fist in the air. "The subway is plastered with your posters, Kaminari." "Yeah, I practically have the date and time memorized," Tsuyu Azui added, her lips quirking in amusement. "I can't wait to see one of our classmates in an anime." Kirishima said, looking at Kaminari with a glint of admiration. "Maybe I'll get to be in it too someday." Mineta, however, had a different reaction. With a suggestive smirk, he leaned forward. "Hey, maybe they could add more Class 1A students. I wouldn't mind meeting some cute anime girls. If that happens, my radiant charm could outshine everyone and make me the true protagonist." Aoyama Yuga declared, striking a dramatic pose, hand to his face as he sparkled with self-admiration. "Tch, lame." Bakugo scoffed, slinging his bag over his shoulder as he headed for the door. "I don't need to waste time watching some stupid show. I've got training to do." "No way I'm watching." Kaminari just laughed. "Bye now, he understood Bakugo's personality well enough to know he didn't mean half of what he said. Despite his brash attitude and harsh words, Bakugo never crossed the line into real bullying except, perhaps, when it came to Midoriya, and that was a whole other story. But Minata's suggestion did spark an idea. Having more Class 1A students appear in Pokemon could be fun, and they did need a large cast for the show. With a quick glance at Yaoyorozu, the two exchanged knowing nods, then Kaminari spoke up again. Alright, if any of you are interested in making a cameo in the Pokemon world, come see me now. Just give me your name and address, and I'll arrange for the company to send you a portrait licensing contract. A wave of excitement rippled through the room. Really? We can actually be in it. Minato shouted in delight, visions of anime girls dancing in his mind. I want in. Mina cried, bouncing with excitement. She grabbed Eureka's hand and added, Okako and I are both signing up. Eureka stammered, her cheeks turning pink. The idea of appearing on TV was thrilling but also nerve-wracking. I don't want to cause any trouble. Despite her hesitation, the glimmer of excitement in her eyes was unmistakable. With my unique charm, I'll surely add some sparkle to the animation, Aoyama said with a dramatic flair, as if it were a given. Make me the manliest character possible. Kirishima demanded, flexing his arms proudly. Not a chance. Tetsu interrupted, bumping fists with him. I'll prove at the sports festival that I'm the toughest in Class 1A. Ha! Bring it on! Kirishima shot back, locking eyes with Tetsu as their fiery rivalry reignited, an intense spark crackling between them. While the others clamored to write down their details, students like Tokoyami and Shoji watched from the sidelines, not signing up but also not leaving the room. 10 minutes later, Kaminari looked over the list of names and addresses on the paper, nodding with satisfaction. Nearly the whole class had signed up, except for Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ida, who was probably still running laps outside, and Midoriya, who had disappeared somewhere. With a cheerful farewell, the students packed up and headed home. Kaminari, however, didn't follow Momo or join Tetsu on the way out. Instead, he made his way to the principal's office. Aizawa-sensei had mentioned during lunch that Principal Nizu wanted to see him, though he hadn't said why. Kaminari couldn't help but wonder what the eccentric principal had in store. As for Momo, she had her own studies to focus on, preparing for the upcoming Hero Experience Festival. That meant their private study sessions were on hold for now, a bit of a relief for Kaminari, since it gave him more time to work on his special moves. 7 p.m. In the Kaminari household, the family gathered in the living room, snacking on fresh pineapple cut by Kaminari's mom as they waited eagerly for 7:30. This was at the broadcast time for Pokemon, airing in the prime Saturday night slot. Securing this time slot had taken considerable influence from Mitsui, which only highlighted the company's pull. Mitsui and the Yaoyorozu family had divided the responsibilities for the project. Mitsui handled the animation production and promotion, while the Yaoyorozu family managed the Pikachu band. Of course, since Kaminari insisted on keeping the band strictly student-led, he'd turned down all business performances for now. Besides, with the UA Sports Festival approaching, there wasn't much for Yaoyorozu's side to manage apart from keeping the band's online presence alive with occasional news snippets and ads. Thinking of performances reminded Kaminari of what the principal had discussed with him. Dad, Principal Nizu talked to me after school today, he began, taking a sip of his drink. Oh? What about? His father asked, popping another slice of pineapple into his mouth. Kaminari's mom looked equally curious. After all, it wasn't every day that the principal of UA wanted to have a private chat. He asked if Kyoka and I could perform the opening song for the first-year class during the sports festival. Kaminari replied with a casual grin. He wants us to do it under the name of the Pikachu band, with a song that matches U.A.'s values. What? Kaminari's parents both exclaimed in shock. Did they hear that right? Their son had been invited to perform the opening act for the UA Sports Festival. Chapter 75, New Song in Bakugo. Son, are you telling the truth? Kaminari's mother asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and skepticism, as if afraid Kaminari was playing some elaborate joke. It's true, Kaminari confirmed, nodding. To be honest, he'd been just as stunned as they were when Principal Nizu first proposed the idea during their meeting. That's amazing. Kaminari's mother rushed over and hugged him tightly, pride shining in her eyes. You're really incredible. Clap. Well done, son. Kaminari's father clapped his hands in excitement. He knew exactly what this meant. The UA Sports Festival was no ordinary event. It was a massive spectacle, even more popular than the Olympics in Japan. With the eyes of the entire country and even international viewers focused on it, a performance here would be the ultimate promotion. This principal really gave you a huge gift. Kaminari's father said, grinning. Any lingering resentment he'd held toward UA for putting his son in harm's way during the recent villain attack vanished instantly. But, why did they choose Kaminari for this? His mother asked, her brow furrowing slightly. As far as I remember, there's never been an opening performance for the sports festival before. Good point. Kaminari, did the principal explain why? Both his parents looked at him expectantly. Such an unusual honor surely came with an explanation. He didn't go into detail, Kaminari admitted, scratching his head. He just said something about supporting our student club band. He still felt a bit puzzled himself, though Principal Nizu's tone had been surprisingly gentle when he'd made the offer. Maybe it's just part of UA's efforts to make this sports festival a bit different, Kaminari's father reasoned with a chuckle. At that moment, any thoughts Kaminari had about refusing commercial performances were quickly tossed aside. This wasn't just some typical gig, this was the UA Sports Festival. Passing up a chance like this would be beyond foolish. So, what song are you going to sing? Only My Railgun? Hero? Or maybe Pokemon? His mother asked, listing the popular titles Kaminari had already released. Well, if we were thinking strictly about promotion, singing Pokemon would be the best choice, but... His father hesitated, glancing at Kaminari. But it doesn't quite fit the theme of the sports festival, Kaminari agreed, understanding his father's concern. He was wrestling with the same dilemma. This was a huge opportunity, like performing at the opening of the Olympics in his past life. Whatever song he chose would reach millions of people. After a long pause, Kaminari murmured, maybe I should write a new song for this. A new song? His father looked at him in surprise, and then a bit of worry crept into his expression. Are you sure you have enough time? Yes, and even if you do, what if you spend all your time on this song? Don't you need to prepare for the sports festival too? His mother added, clearly concerned. Kaminari smiled reassuringly. Writing a song won't take too much time. And as for the sports festival, I've been preparing for years. The next few weeks are just for fine-tuning. His parents exchanged a look, a mixture of pride and worry on their faces. But in the end, they nodded, trusting in his judgment. All right, then. We'll support whatever decision you make, his mother said softly. I know you won't let us down. His father added with a grin. At that moment, a familiar theme song began to play on the TV. It was time for the premiere of Pokemon. Hey, it's starting. Kaminari's mother said, eyes lighting up. Yeah, I can't wait. Kaminari murmured, as all three of them quieted down to watch. On the screen, Denki the protagonist modeled after Kaminari himself appeared alongside Pikachu, embarking on their journey together. The opening sequence showcased scenes of Denki interacting with various Pokemon, all set to the catchy beat of the OP theme, aim to be a Pokemon master. Whether in fire, water, grass, or forest. Whether in earth, clouds, or under a girl's skirt. Pikachu. The song, performed by Kaminari and Kyoka, filled the living room, and through countless TVs across Japan, it reached homes nationwide. All the prior hype and marketing efforts finally paid off as fans tuned in to see what Pokemon was all about. Mom! Come quick! Kyoka called excitedly from the living room, waving her mother over from the kitchen. All right, I'm coming. Her dad was already sprawled out on the couch, watching with a curious look on his face. After listening to the theme for a bit, he frowned slightly and asked, Hey, why is that Kaminari kid the only one singing? What about you? Kyoka blushed and scratched her head. I was only on accompaniment, Dad. I didn't actually sing. Her dad's frown deepened. Why not? You sing just as well as he does. I never told him I could sing, Kyoka admitted, embarrassed. What an idiot, her dad muttered, shaking his head. Meanwhile, in homes across Japan, the families of Class 1A students, Tetsu's family, Yaeorozu's family, even Yurika's family were all tuned in to watch the show. The main character, modeled after Kaminari's likeness, was named simply Denki in the anime, making it easier for people to remember. So now, while he was Kaminari in real life, he was known as Denki in the Pokemon world. At TV Tokyo's headquarters, Section Chief Akiyoshi, responsible for overseeing animation ratings, was watching the debut with bated breath. Normally, he wouldn't need to oversee something as routine as a ratings check. But this wasn't just any anime, this was a show backed by the Mitsui and Yae Orozu families, two of Japan's most powerful financial groups. In Japan, the influence of such groups was no small matter. After the first half hour, the ratings team sat in stunned silence as they watched the numbers roll in. 10% viewership, within 30 minutes. This is the power of the two consortiums. Section Chief Akiyoshi muttered in disbelief. As soon as he processed the numbers, he whipped around and shouted to his team. Notify the department head, now. At Bakugo's house. Hey, that's unusual. Bakugo's dad looked over at his son, who was sitting on the sofa with a focused expression. Yeah, you usually can't sit still for more than 5 minutes. But you've been glued to the TV for half an hour. His mom added, her voice full of surprise. Just then, the ending theme started to play. Who'd want to watch something like this anyway? Bakugo grumbled, his face turning red. He jumped up, flustered, and tossed the remote control onto the couch. I'm going to bed. TCH, boring. Chapter 76, the show begins. Without realizing it, April had quietly slipped by, and Japan was now entering the vibrant, energetic month of May. Today was the opening day of the Hero Sports Festival, an event that drew the attention of the entire nation. To see his son's performance live, Kaminari's father had gone to great lengths to secure 2 coveted tickets. Considering how difficult it was to get seats, he considered himself quite lucky. Even though the UA Sports Arena was the largest multifunctional venue in Japan, able to hold a staggering 120,000 people, that was still far from enough to satisfy the demand for tickets. Especially since UA High School had sent out a wave of official invitations to Japan's hero community, which meant that around 90% of the country's professional heroes would be attending. Seats for them were, of course, reserved. This move was UA's way of sending a message to the villain world. Their stance was clear. Come if you dare. And as for Kaminari, he'd spent the past month working hard. Between rehearsing his new song with Kyoka and perfecting his special move for the sports festival, he'd been busy. For Kyoka's family, the chance to perform at an event like this was an honor, perhaps even more exciting than the sports festival itself. Kyoka's parents, particularly her usually reserved mother, had been thrilled when they heard the news. In fact, their respect for Kaminari had skyrocketed, and they now fully supported the formation of the Pikachu band, even offering to help promote it within their circle of music industry friends. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Kaminari arrived at the Hero Sports venue, carrying his guitar case. He looked around at the early morning crowd in surprise. Hey, so many people here already. He knew the sports festival wasn't scheduled to start until 8, but the place was already packed with families, friends, and fans. Food stalls lined both sides of the pathway, filling the air with the mouth-watering smells of festival snacks, as attendees strolled around, basking in the excitement of the event. Kaminari had come early to do some last-minute preparations. He figured Kyoka had either already arrived or would be there soon. Sure enough, when he walked into the spacious backstage area, he spotted Jiro tuning her bass with the help of a few music teachers. Hey, good morning, Lightning Boy. Present Mike greeted him enthusiastically as soon as he saw him enter. Good morning, Mr. Mike. Kaminari replied with a smile, nodding at Kyoka, who shot him a small grin as she continued tuning her instrument. He then gave Present Mike a respectful salute. He knew how hard the teacher had been working to help them prepare. All right, let's get to work. Present Mike clapped his hands together, embodying UA's trademark efficiency. Since you're both here, let's go over the performance a few more times. Especially the lyrics, memorize them. Got it? Yes, Mr. Mike. Kaminari and Kyoka answered in unison. Although they'd heard this countless times in the past month, they weren't tired of it. They were both filled with a mix of nerves and excitement. What, you think Kaminari wouldn't be nervous? Even with his adult mind, anyone would feel the pressure of performing at an event like this. How many adults get to sing in front of a crowd at an Olympic-level event? To say he wasn't nervous would be a lie. With Kaminari and Kyoka leading, the familiar prelude of their song filled the work area again. Though the music was beautiful, the backstage staff had heard it so many times by now that they barely reacted. The first few days, everyone had been singing along. But as the rehearsals continued, even the catchiest song starts to lose its shine. After hearing it on repeat, they'd become numb to it. Kaminari's electric guitar was decorated with a Pikachu sticker, and Kyoka's bass had a sticker of a pink and purple Pokemon with large ears, Sonic Rabbit, or Azumarill from Pokemon. Kaminari had always thought Azumarill suited Kyoka's vibe, so he'd sketched it, had a custom sticker made, and gifted it to her. Kyoka had studied the sticker thoughtfully before promptly sticking it on her bass, much to Kaminari's delight. It looked adorable, and now, with Pikachu on Kaminari's guitar and Azumarill on Jiro's bass, the two of them looked like a perfect match. That moment gave Kaminari an idea. Maybe, when more members joined, they could each get a custom Pokemon sticker on their instrument as a signature style for the band. It could become a unique part of their identity. But, he still hadn't figured out which Pokemon would suit Momo. She'd already started dropping hints about wanting her own, and was quite displeased that she didn't have one yet. Finding the right Pokemon for her was now one of Kaminari's top priorities. Time passed in a strange rhythm, slipping by quickly despite their anticipation. Before long, the clock on the wall showed 9:40. The sports festival atmosphere was in full swing. The blue sky, the green field, the white stadium, and the sea of black-clad spectators in the stands, these colors painted a vivid backdrop for the day. Overhead, helicopters circled, capturing footage of the venue below. All 120,000 seats were filled, and in the player lounge, students waited in nervous excitement. In the control room, Aizawa-sensei, wrapped in bandages like a mummy, looked over at Present Mike, who had just walked in. "Are they ready?" "Totally ready," Present Mike replied, looking down at the stage through the glass window with a proud smile. "Those two kids have got real talent. Especially Kaminari Denki, he's a musical genius." He leaned back, smirking. "Honestly, when he graduates, I'd love to recruit him for my agency." As one of Japan's top heroes in the music industry, Present Mike had his own agency, and his side business was a radio broadcasting company where he served as DJ and CEO. "But I have to admit," Aizawa murmured, "I didn't expect the principal to make such a bold decision for Kaminari. It's unconventional." "Well, from what I heard, Principal Nizu had to negotiate quite a bit with the higher UPS to add this performance to the opening ceremony," Present Mike said, unusually serious. After all, this was unprecedented for the sports festival. He looked down at the rising stage platform in the center of the field where Kaminari and Jiro were standing with their instruments. Then he grinned, his usual energy returning. "But I think Kaminari Denki deserves it." He leaned forward, flipping on the microphone switch in front of him. "Everybody. Now, for the first time in the history of the Hero Sports Festival, please enjoy a special opening performance. They are the Pikachu Band." In the next moment, all the lights on the stage blazed to life, and colorful fireworks shot up around the stadium, igniting the atmosphere with Present Mike's electrifying announcement. "Deserves it, hey." Aizawa's eyes stayed fixed on Kaminari, who was now playing his guitar with confidence, a grin on his face. Aizawa thought to himself, "Don't let us down, Kaminari." Chapter 77, The Sports Festival begins. Even if you want to run away sometimes, even if just for a moment, obstacles can be cleared. Let's keep going, down this road. There's something only you can do. Let this blue planet continue to shine. As the intro music faded, the first voice to sing wasn't Kaminari, the captain of the band, but Kyoka, the bassist. In that instant, all cameras and eyes in the stadium focused on the 15-year-old girl. The crowd, initially quiet and watching with curiosity and some skepticism, was immediately captivated by Kyoka's clear and resonant voice. This song, it was good. Really good. Go and chase. Chase your dreams. Go and protect the friends you cherish. Then Kaminari's powerful voice joined in, lifting the rhythm even higher. His hands strummed the guitar effortlessly, his fingers moving in a blur. Under the bright, colorful lights, he seemed to almost glow, electrifying the atmosphere. These lyrics were the reason Kaminari had chosen this song for the sports festival. In the Class 1A lounge. "So cool. Kaminari." Mina Ashido had her fists clenched in excitement, her eyes wide as she watched Kaminari and Kyoka on the big screen, performing to the cheers of 100,000 people. He's so different from his usual self, Tsuyu murmured, watching the two of them with awe. Kyoka too. I should have said yes. Momo muttered, a hint of regret in her voice. Kaminari had asked her to join as a temporary keyboard player, wanting the three of them to take the stage together. But she'd turned him down, feeling insecure about her piano skills. Though she'd learned the basics due to her family's emphasis on well-rounded education, she didn't feel her skills were good enough to perform on such a large stage. But now, seeing Kaminari and Kyoka in the spotlight, she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Kaminari Denki. I won't lose to you today. Todoroki's gaze was steely as he watched the screen, his expression colder than ever. Today, his father Endeavor would be watching. Todoroki was determined to prove that he could reach the top of the sports festival without using his fire quirk. TCH, show off. Bakugo muttered, his hands in his pockets, his face set in a scowl. But deep down, he couldn't deny the small flare of envy. Bakugo's dream was to surpass All Might and become the ultimate hero, one who was both strong and widely admired. But while he was confident in his strength, he wasn't as sure about his popularity. Watching Kaminari up there, Bakugo felt a spark of inspiration. Back in the stadium, the song Braveheart had captured the audience. The citizens, the professional heroes, even the hero course teachers, everyone was drawn in by the music and lyrics. The principal and the hero teachers, especially, were thrilled. This song was the perfect message for the Hero Sports Festival, inspiring everyone present. Go and catch that bright tomorrow. Go and protect the people you cherish. Let go of your weak self. Break through every wall. The lyrics resonated with every student, first years, second years, third years. The song spoke to their hearts, expressing the passion and determination they all felt about becoming heroes. And Kaminari and Kyoka's performance was absolutely flawless. In the third-year hero lounge. He's really handsome, said a blue-haired girl with a curvaceous figure, her eyes glued to the screen. Yet, their song is amazing, said a sturdy young man with brown, spiky hair. I'd love to meet him in person. Why? Are you thinking of picking up singing? Last I checked, you're tone deaf, joked a quiet, brooding student leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Haha, maybe not. The young man replied, scratching his head in embarrassment. But hey, weren't their names in the subtitles just now? Yeah, they're both first years in Class 1A, replied a girl with an innocent look, her delicate finger pressed thoughtfully against her lips. The guy's name is Kaminari Denki, and the girl's name is Kyoka. Even their names sound cool. Believe in your heart. Kaminari and Kyoka each sang the final line of the song, their voices filled with energy and passion. Together, they played the last chord, bringing their performance to an end. The moment their hands left their instruments, the crowd of nearly 120,000 erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. Pikachu! 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 The audience didn't know Kaminari's name yet, but they remembered the band name that Present Mike had announced, Pikachu Band. In the stands, Kaminari's mom was practically glowing with pride, watching as everyone around her cheered for her son. Look at them! They love our son! She exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. Yeah, he really did it, Kaminari's father said, a proud smile on his face as he watched Kaminari and Kyoka bow to the crowd. He knew that this performance had catapulted Kaminari into stardom. For at least the next month, his name, Kyoka's, and their song would be all over the Japanese media. I hope you're ready for this, Kaminari, he thought to himself. Meanwhile, in a dark, hidden room where Shigaraki and Kurogiri had once met, dozens of LCD screens displayed the live broadcast of the Hero Sports Festival. On each screen, a close-up of Kaminari's face appeared, glistening with sweat from his passionate performance. So, this is the boy who took down Nomu, hey? A tall, shadowy figure said, his eyes fixed on Kaminari's image. Yes. According to our research, his name is Kaminari Denki, and his quirk is electric-based, Kurogiri replied respectfully. The figure nodded thoughtfully. An interesting kid. I'll be watching his next move closely. Chapter 78, Surpass Me. Todoroki Shoto. Kaminari. You guys were amazing out there. What's the name of that song? Wow, I can't believe I have two celebrity classmates. I'm totally getting an autograph. And group photos. Then we can use them to impress the cute girls. Ahem, needless to say, that last comment came from Mineta, the ever-resourceful grape boy. Ha 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 ha. Still buzzing from the performance, Kaminari laughed heartily. He'd just finished his first major show, and the thrill was still coursing through him. He realized he truly loved being on stage. Yeah, this is it. I'm on the right path. That thought solidified his commitment to his dream, strengthening his confidence in his goal of becoming a superstar hero. Nearby, Kyoko was surrounded by a cluster of her female classmates, all chatting excitedly. She seemed just as pleased with how the performance had gone, a small smile breaking through her usual cool demeanor. Kaminari. Suddenly, Todoroki's calm, serious voice cut through the chatter in the room. Kaminari turned to find Todoroki standing right in front of him, his expression colder than usual. What's up? Kaminari asked, slightly surprised. Todoroki's gaze was intense as he said, this time, I'm not holding back. I'll show you the difference between us in a real competition of strength. The final winner will be me. The room fell silent, the weight of Todoroki's words hanging in the air. But Kaminari only smirked, crossing his arms and meeting Todoroki's icy stare with his own confident smile. All right then. Although, to be honest, I think it's still a little early for you. But I, Kaminari Denki, will be waiting for you at the top. With that, Kaminari's voice grew louder, his stance stronger. Under the stunned gazes of his classmates, he issued his own challenge to Todoroki. Surpass my lightning. Surpass me, Todoroki. Todoroki's face darkened at Kaminari's words. What was that supposed to mean? He'd come here to challenge Kaminari, but somehow it felt like he was the one being challenged. Kaminari's words stirred something inside him: anger, pride, and a fierce determination. Frost started to form on his right side as he clenched his fists, a reminder that this sports festival would be his chance to prove himself. Words don't matter here, he reminded himself. Only actions. Stop it, Todoroki. Midoriya, noticing the tension, stepped forward, placing a hand on Todoroki's arm. Calm down, you guys. We're about to start. Smack. But Todoroki shrugged Midoriya's hand off, looking at him with an icy glare. I don't know why, but I can't ignore you. I don't need to know the details, but today, you're also someone I'm determined to defeat. Don't underestimate me. Midoriya's eyes widened briefly, but then his expression turned resolute. I know you're stronger than me. Honestly, except for Kaminari, most of our classmates probably don't stand a chance against you. Bakugo's face immediately twisted in annoyance at that comment, but Midoriya didn't notice and continued. Subjectively and objectively, you're one of the best here, Midoriya acknowledged. But everyone, all of us, including students from other classes, came here to fight for the top spot. Gone was the hesitant boy of yesterday. Now, Midoriya's gaze was sharp, his resolve clear as he looked straight into Todoroki's intense eyes. So, I'll give it everything I've got to fight for first place. This tense exchange between Kaminari, Todoroki, and Midoriya quickly made the three of them the center of attention. The rest of Class 1A watched in silence, sensing the brewing rivalry. The atmosphere was charged, like a powder keg ready to explode. Bakugo, standing nearby, clenched his fists, veins pulsing on his forearms as he glared at the three with pure fury. Oi, 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 so what? I'm just a side character now. You three, just wait. I'll crush every single one of you. The top spot is mine. Meanwhile, outside in the stadium, the Hero Sports Festival was about to kick off. The four giant screens around the arena suddenly cut to present mic. All right, people, are you ready? His voice boomed through the speakers, sending another wave of cheers throughout the stands. The crowd had been waiting eagerly for this moment, and audiences across Japan, glued to their TVs, leaned in with excitement. And for all the media out there. This year, it's the thing you love most, high schoolers unleashed, competing with everything they've got. The Hero Sports Festival has officially begun. Everybody, are you ready? Present mix boundless enthusiasm whipped the already electrified crowd into a frenzy, the cheers so loud they seemed to shake the very stadium. First-year contestants, enter. The music around the venue shifted, the school anthem of UA High blaring triumphantly as the first-year students stepped out onto the field. Step. Step. Kaminari, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki were the first to emerge, leading Class 1A into the stadium. Pop! 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 Fireworks erupted above them, filling the sky with color as the crowd roared even louder. Even though it was still daytime, the spectacle only added to the already intense energy in the air. The next generation of heroes is here, about to face a gauntlet of fierce challenges. The ultimate showdown of the year. Everyone in this stadium is looking forward to these students. And this first group, Class 1A of the Hero Course. The miracle class that survived a villain attack with grit and determination. Present mix words lit another fire in the crowd, turning all eyes to Class 1A. Kaminari and Kyoka, fresh from their performance, were showered with cheers and applause. Many of the spectators were younger kids, elementary and middle school students, who had come with their families and were now screaming their names. As Class 1A stepped out, the rest of the Hero Course classes followed, along with students from General Studies, Support and Business courses. Some of them grumbled quietly to themselves. They didn't like being in the shadow of Class 1A's reputation. In particular, the students of Hero Course Class 1B felt annoyed. To them, Class 1A wasn't special. They'd only gotten attention because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and just happened to encounter villains. If they'd been there, they thought, they would have handled it just as well. But what these students didn't realize was that Class 1A hadn't been lucky to survive the villain attack. They'd been tested, pushed to their limits, facing life and death. The competitors will now take the oath. At that moment, Midnight, standing on a raised platform in a daring, form-fitting outfit, raised a microphone and announced, "Competitor representative, Class 1A's Kaminari Denki." The crowd erupted once more, and Kaminari's confident smile was projected onto the giant screens. None of Class 1A was surprised by the choice. Kaminari had ranked first in the entrance exams, after all. But Bakugo's face twisted in irritation, his fists clenching even tighter. "Why does that lightning jerk always get the spotlight? Just wait till I blow you out of my way." Under the gaze of 100,000 people, Kaminari slowly walked onto the platform and stood beside Midnight and Present Mike. He took a deep breath, a spark of inspiration hitting him. "This is my chance to make an impression." He leaned into the microphone, his voice calm yet carrying across the stadium. "Please remember my name and the way I look standing here, because I, Kaminari Denki, will be the one claiming the crown." Chapter 79, Kaminari becomes stronger. Wow! Kaminari's bold declaration sent an uproar through the crowd in an instant. Though he'd used the word please, his tone and confidence made it sound more like a command. This didn't sit well with several of the students watching, who were annoyed by how much attention he was getting. "Hey, don't get too full of yourself. Who does this golden-haired punk think he is? Just cause you can sing, doesn't mean you're the best." Meanwhile, Tetsu grinned, giving Kaminari a thumbs up. "That's the spirit. You gotta have confidence." "But, won't that make everyone target him?" Ida asked, frowning with worry. Oddly enough, the one person who didn't seem fazed was Bakugo. Normally quick to anger, he stood silently with his hands in his pockets, watching Kaminari's back with a fierce glint in his eyes. "Say whatever you want now," Bakugo thought. "When this starts, I'll show everyone who's really on top." Just as Kaminari returned to the Class 1A group, the screens around the stadium shifted, and Midnight's voice boomed out. "Time for the first event." Without wasting a second, Midnight got right to it. This was U.A.S. style, no unnecessary delays, just straight to the action. "Every year, students face challenges that make them question their abilities," she said. "And the first event, which will decide your fate today, is..." Behind her, a holographic screen popped up, displaying the event name in bold letters. "Obstacle Race." Seeing the high-tech projection, Kaminari couldn't help but marvel. He knew this world's technology was advanced, but seeing a perfect virtual display right in front of him still felt surreal. "All students from the 11 participating classes will compete in this race," Midnight continued, turning to the screen. "The course runs around the stadium, with a total length of 4 kilometers. She raised her arm and gave a sly grin, licking her lips with anticipation. "And remember, UA places a heavy emphasis on freedom, so as long as you stay on the track, anything goes." At this, a collective cheer rose from the crowd. Many students, especially those from non-hero courses, were thrilled. This was a rare chance for them to use their quirks freely in front of an audience. "All right, everyone, get to your places." Under Midnight's command, hundreds of students quickly gathered at the starting line. Kaminari noticed that the exit was a narrow gap, barely wide enough to fit more than a couple of people at once. I see. Kaminari narrowed his eyes, realizing the strategy behind it. The lights above the exit flashed green, one by one, until finally, with the third beep, Midnight's voice rang out. Start! In an instant, every student surged forward, racing toward the narrow opening. But despite being able to use their quirks, most held back, hesitating in the initial crush. They're still not used to it. Aizawa noted quietly from the commentary booth, observing the chaotic start with his usual calm. Present Mike, however, was his usual animated self. Isn't that exit way too narrow? They're gonna pile up like crazy. Out of the way. Don't push me. Midoriya struggled in the crowd, quickly realizing the purpose of the narrow starting point. So, this is the first hurdle. A built-in screening. He thought. Just then, Todoroki took action. With a quick motion, he activated his ice quirk, freezing the ground and trapping dozens of students in place. In a flash, the cold wind spread, immobilizing everyone's legs in a solid sheet of ice. Sorry, but I'm going on ahead. As Todoroki began to slide over the ice, a burst of electricity crackled behind him, followed by a loud voice. Better pick up the pace, Todoroki. In a blur of golden light, Kaminari shot past him, leaving a trail of crackling energy and a playful taunt. Kaminari Denki. Todoroki's eyes narrowed as he watched Kaminari's electrified form speeding ahead. All right, you're not getting away so easily. Without holding back, Todoroki summoned more ice, leaping forward with powerful strides as he created a path of frozen pillars beneath him. Meanwhile, behind them, Todoroki and Kaminari's combined attack had caused mayhem, leaving many students frozen or stumbling. But a few with stronger control over their quirks managed to break free and sprint toward the exit. Don't get too comfortable. With a blast from his hands, Bakugo rocketed into the air, snarling, half and half freak. Thunder idiot! I'm coming for both of you. However, unlike in the original timeline, Midoriya was struggling even more. Todoroki's ice and Kaminari's electricity had hit him head-on, leaving him paralyzed on the frozen ground, filled with a growing sense of desperation. No, this can't be happening. Midoriya gasped, his body refusing to respond. I can't fall behind here. His heart pounded as he remembered his promise to All Might, his resolve to show everyone what he was capable of. Move, he thought desperately, forcing every ounce of strength into his limbs. Move. Up ahead, Kaminari and Todoroki had already reached the first major obstacle, a group of massive zero-point robots, the same type they'd faced in the entrance exam. Towering like buildings, the sheer number of them caused even Bakugo, Tokoyami, Tetsu, and the other top students to hesitate. So this is our first real test. Kaminari muttered, eyeing the robotic giants with a smirk. But he had no intention of slowing down. In a burst of speed, he sprinted across one robot's outstretched arm, looking directly at a nearby camera as he charged forward. Suddenly, the golden currents surrounding Kaminari intensified, flaring into a radiant, flame-like aura. His speed doubled, transforming him into what looked like a living bolt of lightning. God's speed. To the audience in the stadium, Kaminari was nothing but a streak of gold flashing across the screen. Even the satellites broadcasting the event struggled to keep up with his movements. When the cameras finally caught up, the head of the leading zero-point robot was engulfed in a fiery explosion, electricity and flames erupting in all directions. What just happened? Present Mike stared at the screen, wide-eyed. That was Kaminari, right? He just vanished and then boom. Aizawa squinted at the display, his expression thoughtful as he processed Kaminari's explosive power. He's developed a lot. But before Present Mike could finish reacting, Todoroki struck. The robot next to Kaminari was instantly frozen from its base up, as Todoroki glided underneath it, his gaze cold and focused. Just watch, Dad, Todoroki thought, his resolve hardening. This time, I'll get first place with my ice alone. But even as he thought that, his eyes were fixed on the golden figure blazing ahead. I need to take him down first. Kaminari Denki, you're my target.
Thanks for listening.